Hello, this is Alt Schwift X, and I'm here with Clydus.
Hi.
We are talking today
That's
about...
not my real voice. I sound like this.
No, when he's not broadcasting, that's his voice the entire time.
Don't tell them that.
So Sandkings is a story written by George R.R. Martin in 1979, because before George Martin was famous for writing the Game of Thrones books, he wrote a bunch of sci-fi, he wrote some horror, he wrote for television. And for decades, the most popular, most acclaimed story George Martin ever wrote was Sandkings. It won the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, the Locus Award. It was what he was most well known for years, until he wrote A Game of Thrones. Sandkings was adapted to a graphic novel. Sandkings was adapted to a TV episode of The Outer Limits in 1995. Netflix said that they were developing a Sandkings movie in 2021.
And then nothing else has been heard from of that.
It fell into the Netflix black hole and never emerged again.
The Netflix nether.
Sandkings is another thing that George Martin hoped to write as a series, but he never continued it.
If you read Dream Songs, his collection of stories with essays sprinkled in about his life and career, that's something of a recurring theme.
George wrote that, quote, "My career is littered with the corpses of dead series." So a while ago we talked about the new movie In the Lost Lands, which was also based on a George Martin story.
Which he also wanted to turn into a series of stories.
So there is a pattern here. But we really, really want to talk about Sandkings because it's a really cool story. It's really scary, it's fun, it's weird, and it also has like a lot of deep connections to the Game of Thrones books. I think it connects to a lot of like the deep mysteries of like the White Walkers and the Old Gods and how the series might end. And it's also really fun to compare the George Martin short story to the TV adaptation on The Outer Limits.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into all of that. But first, I think that I'll give you a quick summary, just so that we're on the same page. Here's basically what happens in Sandkings by George R.R. Martin, 1979. Rapid fire. All right,
Let's go. Hit me with it.
The story is set in the future on a planet called Boulder. So this is part of George R.R. Martin's science fiction universe he calls the Thousand Worlds. He wrote a bunch of stories in this universe. The protagonist of the story is Simon Cress.
Protagonist?
Simon, well, I mean, we'll talk
we'll
about
get
that. Maybe the Sandkings are the protagonist.
Interesting.
So Simon Cress is a rich douchebag. He keeps exotic alien pets for his entertainment. He goes to a mysterious shop called Woe and Shade, and he buys Sandkings, which are an intelligent, insect-like alien creature. Sandkings are hive minds. They're kind of like ants with the mobiles telepathically controlled by a Moor. It's a bit like a queen.
That is what ants do, yeah.
It's like ants, it's like bees. And so Cress buys 4 colonies of these little Sand King bugs. One colony is white, one black, one red, one orange, and he keeps them in a tank, in a terrarium. Cress is cruel to his Sand Kings. He starves them. He makes them fight wars for entertainment at parties. The Sand Kings start to worship Cress by building images of his face, and as Cress gets more cruel and deranged and afraid, the images of his face become more twisted and evil-looking. Cress punishes his Sand Kings. He stabs the White Moor, the queen. Cress's ex, Kath, tells him to stop abusing the Sand Kings, and Kath smashes the tank, so then Simon kills Kath and feeds her to the Sand Kings. The Sand Kings escape and get out of control. They get bigger and smarter. They start metamorphizing, so Cress hires some mercenaries to kill the Sand Kings, and they kill some of them. But then the Sand Kings affect Simon telepathically. They use his fear, and so Simon ends up sacrificing the mercenaries to the White Sand Kings. And he feeds a bunch more innocent people to the Sand Kings. And it's this idea that Simon's cruelty and bad emotions are corrupting the Sand Kings. They are a reflection of his evil. And ultimately, Simon is attacked and killed by a colony of escaped Sand Kings, which all have his face. So I think that the message of the story, basically, is that if you put cruelty and evil into the world, the evil comes back to bite you on the bum.
And elsewhere, everywhere else.
All places, including the bum.
Do you think that being the message of Sandkings, or in your interpretation of the message of Sandkings, do you think that will also be the message of Ice and Fire.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Yes, because I think that Ice and Fire is about human evil, and it's all the ways that we're cruel and petty and warlike to each other. And I think that something bad happened to the children of the forest. I mean, the children of the forest were all but wiped out by the humans, and there's something evil about that, and the humans destroyed most of the weirwoods, and there's something evil about that, and I think the White Walkers are the consequence of that. That is, I think, what's really going on in Ice and Fire. And as we will discuss, there's a lot of similarities between the Sandkings and the White Walkers. And the way that the Sandkings are defeated, I think, might be similar to how the White Walkers might be defeated in the books.
Insofar as the Sandkings are defeated.
Yeah, I mean, there is one particular moment when Simon Cress stabs the heart of the white Sand Kings.
Yes, interesting.
Which is the same
with
as
a ceremonial sword,
with a
nonetheless.
sword. Yeah, and it's so much like when Arya stabs the Night King in
you
Game
had
of
to bring
Thrones.
Game of Thrones into
Well,
it, didn't
it's just
you?
the same thing because we saw it in Thrones. We saw the Night King get stabbed.
You could have said Jon Snow, Lightbringer, Azor Ahai, Heart of Winter, but you had to go to Arya Stark. You had to go to the dagger, which
I'm a bit confused.
it makes me confused.
Best season ever!
Oh man, the soundboard. It's good to be back, everyone.
Welcome back to the internet. Yeah, I think that obviously we imagine that in the Game of Thrones books, it'll be different to the Game of Thrones show. We imagine that it'll be about fighting the Great Other, or perhaps stabbing some frozen tree, or there's lots of theories about exactly how it will go. But I think that what we see in Sand Kings with like the telepathic control of an army of like identical soldiers is so similar to how the White Walkers control the army of the dead. And the way that, you know, in the show when the Night King is stabbed, all of the White Walkers die, just like how when the White Moor is stabbed in Sand Kings, all of the soldiers collapse. Like, there's just... as we've said before, George plays with the same ideas over and over.
Yeah, like, he says that his career is littered with the corpses of dead series, but in essence, it's all just the one series, and, like, A Song of Ice and Fire is the closest he's got to ending it.
Yeah, I mean, like, they say that some authors just try to write the same book over and over, and, like, every book that George has ever written is, like, an attempt to tell the same story about wonder and disillusionment and heartbreak and war and power and... Because, yes, so much of it is here. And obviously, like, the thing about, like, the Sand Kings making those faces, like, statues of Cress is the same as, like, how the Children of the Forest carve faces onto the weirwoods.
Right. I think, like, a very high-level observation of this story is to note that the face of God is a recurring fixation throughout Ice and Fire. The Children of the Forest carve the face of God into the weirwoods. The Faith of the Seven have 7 different faces of God, and like in Bravos, the faceless men worship the many-faced God because they believe that all gods are different faces of the God who is death.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely, like, you know, connected to the theme of power and trying to attain power. There's the question of, like, trying to be God and trying to, like, attain godlike power, and what does that mean, and is that folly? And I think that in A Song of Ice and Fire, in the books, I think that Euron is someone who's trying to attain godlike power, similar to how, like, Simon Cress is attempting to be a god and is playing God with the Sand Kings. And in the same way that Simon Cress's ultimate fate is to be devoured by the creatures who he hoped to use. Like, you know, he thought he could be a god over them, but they ate him. I think that Euron is going to be eaten by whatever Lovecraftian squid monster he summons, right? Like, there's theories that in the books that what Euron is going to do by doing this blood sacrifice out in the water is going to result in some monster, and he's going to think he can control it, but it'll eat him.
It's the same thing with Valyrians and fire. Like, they thought they could control fire in the dragons, and then they were consumed by fire in the Doom of Valyria. And the Targaryens, of course, like, their power as a dynasty waned when, you know, all the hot House of the Dragon spoilers sentence does not need to be finished.
Yeah. So just like the classic idea that the will to attain power destroys you in the end, and that's something that George has told a lot of times. And I like seeing, like, the little whispers of Valyria in this short story. Is that there are volcanoes, like Cress dumps people's vehicles in a volcano, and also there's obsidian which he like gives to the Sand Kings.
To incorporate into their castles, yeah.
Yeah, and so obsidian and volcanoes, of course, are elements connected to the Targaryens and the Valyrians and Dragonstone. So a lot of the same, textures are there. And it's funny because, this is a science fiction story, which in theory should be so radically different to his fantasy work. But
not if you ask George. If you ask George, in Dream Songs, he writes about how science fiction and fantasy are, in essence, the same idea, just with different hats on. The window dressing is different, I believe he puts it.
Yeah, it might be swords instead of laser guns, but like the themes and the hearts and the characters are the same.
And at the core of that is using a distinct, distant setting from our own world to explore the human condition as it exists in our world. Yeah,
using the fantastical to examine something universal.
Yeah.
So one of the like interesting choices about this story is that the main character is awful.
Yeah, oh god, he might be the worst main character that George has ever written.
Like, I think some common writing advice is to have a main character who's likable and you want them to win and you relate to them and you believe in them. But this protagonist, Simon Cress, is arrogant, hedonistic, indulgent, ignorant.
He's the villain in any
cruel,
other story.
Narcissistic. He has no empathy for other humans whatsoever. I think he's a psychopath.
He's a psychopath, yeah.
And like, the best way to make your readers dislike a character, I think, is to kick a puppy.
Yeah.
And that's what Simon does.
Simon feeds a puppy to piss off his ex. He feeds a puppy to his alien insects.
He also kicks his pet shambler at one point.
Not the shambler.
And like in the first paragraph, it talks about how Cress is amused when his pet piranhas eat each other. So like, animal cruelty.
It's like base level for him.
That's like the most uncontroversially bad thing you can have. Like, everyone, you instantly hate this guy. So why did George pick such a monster to be his protagonist? Because like in the Outer Limits TV adaptation of this story, they do something very different.
Simon Cress is a family man with like a diligent government job.
Yeah, that TV adaptation is so different because they really go to pains to make Simon much more relatable, much more normal, much more likable. He does change and go crazy towards the end. But the original story is different because Simon Cress is just totally dislikable the whole time.
Also in the TV adaptation, the ending is completely different because Simon goes out in heroism, attempting to stop the Sandkings from killing his family and potentially taking over the planet.
Yeah.
Whereas, in the short story, Simon goes out cowardly, dragged to his death by what he created.
Yeah, and you've got to feel that he deserves it, at least somewhat.
In the short story, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, it's radically different. And yeah, we'll definitely talk more about how the TV adaptation, changes things. But yeah, I think like George just loves interrogating evil. And that's definitely what he's doing with Simon. And I think the story's about like the consequence of Simon's evil, and the reflection of his evil in the Sand Kings. I think that's what's going on. Apparently, this story was inspired by when George Martin was in college, and he knew this guy who hosted parties.
Creature features.
Where he'd show monster movies, and he had this tank of piranha, and he would put live goldfish in the piranha tank to be eaten alive to entertain his friends and his guests.
And little George R.R. Martin's over here thinking, well, that's a bit fucked up, isn't it?
Yeah. Imagine being that guy, like reading George Martin's acclaimed award-winning story and going, oh, I'm the asshole who inspired this.
Oh, I get dragged to my death by my creation bearing my twisted face.
You gotta admire the confidence of artists to just put their friends and exes into their stories to be read by millions. Yeah, so yeah, Simon Cress is very dislikable. And the setting is the planet Boulder, which is one of the human worlds in George Martin's sci-fi universe.
Yeah, in the far distance of the Thousand Worlds, humans have colonized many different planets, and I think Old Earth is sort of like a lost relic.
I think so, yeah.
Which is it's a very interesting, rife setting that George came up with and wrote many, many stories in.
I think the basic fact about the Thousand Worlds universe that's cool is the idea of like the interregnum, because you know the humans were powerful and they colonized all these worlds, but then there was a war and there was a collapse. And for like years there was a collapse and there was no space flight. And it's only now that like people are starting to make contact again.
Civilization is re-emerging to the same level of networking it once was.
Which is the perfect sci-fi setting because it means that there are humans all over the universe in different places, but there's still mystery because they haven't been in contact for a long time. And so there's re-establishment and happening, and there's adventure and chaos and possibilities and mystery.
Room for the same myth and legends that characterize a fantasy story.
Yeah.
Like throughout the Thousand Worlds, you hear about these legendary explorers who, you know, in a more traditional sci-fi setting that's not an interregnum, like this wouldn't be legend, it wouldn't be myth, there would be people, they would have records of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi future.
Yeah.
Which gives you all the flexibility and the excitement of the unknown and the broken and the gone and the forgotten. So, yeah, it's a great setting. And so Balder, I suppose, is named for the Norse god Balder, who I think a lot of people now would know from Baldur's Gate. Have you played Baldur's Gate?
Oh, have I played Baldur's Gate? I put off playing Baldur's Gate for like a year and a half because I knew what it would do for me, and I've only made a couple of videos this year, and that's why.
So did you meet Balder? Is Balder in Baldur's Gate?
I won't spoil the story of Baldur's Gate 3, but in a sense.
Yeah, cool. I should play Baldur's Gate, shouldn't I?
You should. Everyone should. It's fantastic.
So he's a Norse god, or like a Germanic god, and the city on this planet Balder in George's story is named Asgard, for the home of the Norse gods. And the city of Asgard has a Rainbow Boulevard, which I suppose is named for the Bifrost Rainbow Bridge in Norse mythology.
I genuinely didn't put that one together while I was reading it.
So I love the rainbow. And
just like, Rainbow Road, like in Mario Kart. That's cool.
He might have been thinking of Mario Kart.
I really doubt it. It was 1979 and Super Mario Kart wouldn't come out for another 16 years.
It was 1979. Rainbows were everywhere.
True.
George loves rainbows. I mean, he's got the Rainbow Guard.
Were rainbows gay even back then?
That's a great question.
I don't know if they were.
I want to watch someone's video essay about the precise journey of the rainbow from being God's forgiveness after the flood to being like the LGBT plus flag. There's some...
And, its presence in Norse mythology as well.
Yeah. No. Rainbow video essay when. But I think George keeps using the rainbow because he loves color. He loves nothing better than color. And senses and flavors and textures, and there's so much of all of that here. That I think is something that's missing from the TV adaptation, obviously, in The Outer Limits, is that it doesn't have that science fictional wonder and color and craziness.
It's set in present day America, basically.
And as we've complained a million times, the Game of Thrones TV show
Completely
also does not have
color.
the color and the wonder and the sensory, lavish, visceral detail that George Martin puts in everything. It's also horny.
Very horny.
It's horny, like...
George is a horny man.
He is a horny man, and so he describes the temple brothel of the Secret Sisterhood on Balder. He describes the Euphoria bars.
Everyone's smoking joysticks.
Which I guess are like some kind of drug. It's like death sticks in Star Wars. But he's walking down the city and he comes across this mysterious shop, and this is like the cursed shop that sells monkey paws and stuff, right? This is like
Homer Simpson's cursed frozen yogurt.
Is that what it is in The Simpsons?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's like a Twilight Zone episode. There's a Stephen King story. There's a lot of different stories that use this trope of like the mystery shop that makes Faustian pacts, and you buy it, but you get some sort of poetic justice backfire. It's the kind of place you buy a gremlin. So that's where Cress buys.
That's where you
the
hired
Sandkings.
me, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's right. I
wonder how that one's gonna bite you in the ass.
I got the best podcast co-host in the universe, but now I've got slipping away stuck in my head for the next 10 years.
Things could be worse.
And so the shop, like Cress is intrigued by the shop because he sees the shop front and the window's full of this mist. It's this mysterious magical mist that's changing colors from like glittering gold to deep gray to red, and it's intriguing. And like, again, it's color, it's senses, it's the stuff of magic and wonder. And it reminds me when Daenerys in Game of Thrones goes to the House of the Undying, and she takes the shade of the evening drug, and she's overwhelmed by the flavors and the colors, and is stimulating her senses. And it's when Bran takes the weirwood paste.
When he eats Jojen.
When he eats Jojen, possibly.
S tier.
So again, it's like always that temptation of the magic and the wonder and the color.
I'm glad you brought up the House of the No, we'll get to it later. We'll get to it later with the hive mind and the Moors.
So Cress meets Woe, who's one of the shopkeepers, and she's tall and she's pale, which reminds me of like pale Bloodraven, who gives Bran the paste, and the pale warlocks who give Daenerys the shade of the evening. It's always a pale witch who's offering the magic, and that's how we learned about the Sandkings. I thought it was funny that Woe, as well as the Sandkings, Woe offers a mimic, a creature that like copies its owner.
Yeah.
And she mentions that the mimic, it'll copy your movements and your expressions. It'll even copy your facial expressions. And it's like, hang on, that's the same thing. Like, because the Sandkings replicate the face just as the mimic.
Prior to telling Simon about the Sandkings, Woe offers him the gladiatorial ants and the mimicking monkey. And he's like, I'm not interested in insects that fight each other. I'm not interested in something that can copy me. But the Sandkings do both.
Yeah. It seems like Woe had a very particular thing in mind. Which is like, it's interesting, like, what are Woe's motivations? Is it possible for us to untangle Woe's motivations? Because Woe does not approve of Cress's mistreatment of the Sandkings.
The very next time she meets Simon, she's like, this is fucked up. What you're doing here is wrong. But is that like a warning from the pale witch shopkeeper sort of trope?
Yeah. But it's interesting that, like, Woe is not saying, oh, you shouldn't make the Sandkings fight. She says something a bit more subtle, which is like, you should let the Sandkings fight on their own terms, according to their own nature. Which I think is almost like a religious, philosophical thing of it's like
sociological as well.
Because like the human, the owner is the god of the Sandkings. They control the food. They are worshipped. It's the nature of the Sandkings to worship their godlike owner. And the question is like, does God intervene and control and like punish his worshippers, or does God allow his people to make their own choices and their own decisions? I mean, that's one of the solutions to the problem of evil, right? The great philosophical...
There's no divine intervention.
Yeah, exactly. Like, God allows his people to have free will, and that's why there's evil. It's kind of like the deepest theological question there is, and it's kind of what's going on here, isn't it? I think that's why Woe is like, you got to let the Sandkings make their own mistakes. Don't be a bad god.
Well, she's not characterizing them as mistakes. She's characterizing them as entertainment.
Well, yeah. But it's so fascinating because what's revealed later is that Woe's partner Shade, who we don't see, is in fact a Sand King.
A Sand King Moor.
Yeah, like the leader, the queen. And their employees are the Sand King mobiles, the like drones. Yep. So they are Sand Kings.
Yes.
And yet they approve of like using Sand Kings as pets, which is like, it's such a weird like moral thing.
You could, like, this is reading into a character who there's not too much to read into about. You could say that maybe Woe like sees in Simon a lesson to teach.
Yeah.
Or maybe she just like wants shit to get because the orange Sand Kings break out and become more evolved than any of Simon's others. Like maybe that's what she wanted. She wanted another Sand King more I don't know, but it is sort of sick and twisted, and that doesn't really seem to be what she wants.
Yeah. I think that the cursed shopkeeper trope, like the shopkeeper's motives are always going to be a bit inscrutable. And I think the thing that makes sense is usually they want to teach the protagonist a lesson.
Yeah, but this lesson is you're dead now.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of the lesson.
It's a test, and Cress fails the test. He could have passed the test, but he failed.
Also, you have to remember that George intended on Woe and Shade reappearing in more and more stories.
Yeah.
So I think that explains a bit of why Woe is completely inscrutable.
I mean, Woe gives Cress the freedom and the opportunity to choose in the way that Cress fails to give his Sand Kings the freedom and the opportunity to choose, which is interesting. I think, free will kind of is part of this, I think.
How do you think free will plays into ice and fire? Do you think that's a? Do you think that's perhaps a defining narrative fixture?
No, it never comes up.
No.
So something that struck me when like we see the Sandkings described, like the Sandkings is this little cool ant farm, and they have their wars and they have their factions, and they have their wars for the entertainment of the person who owns them. They have they're feudal, like they have a queen and they have their soldiers.
They are born colored, like they wear their tribal affiliation on their bodies. It's the closest. It's their houses.
They're Westeros. They're the houses of Westeros.
There's whites and blacks and oranges and reds. There's Starks and Lannisters and so on.
And in Dream Songs, George Martin described the origins of the houses of Westeros, essentially, which was when George Martin was a kid, he had pet turtles. And he kept his pet turtles in a little plastic toy castle. And so he had Turtle Castle. And George gave names to the turtles, and he imagined all these alliances and betrayals and romances and connections and history for these turtles. And it's Turtle Castle that evolved into Westeros. And I think that George's memories of playing with his turtles in his castle are absolutely reflected in like Cress playing with his Sand Kings in the terrarium.
God, little George sounds so adorable.
Right. And George Martin, to this day, has something similar. He has a bunch of medieval knight toys that he keeps, all these miniatures in these display cases in his home, which is another reflection of that. So, and I think all of that connects, of course, to like feeling like a god, because what is an author if not a god of this imagined little world? And so that feeling of like, should one be cruel to their characters? Like people have accused George Martin of being a harsh god to his characters and killing them off and torturing them. And, there is a weird sadistic element of writing these cruel stories.
Because George, I think, more than most other authors, offers his characters so much free will.
And they disappoint him sometimes.
Like, is the cruelty the world he's put them in?
Yeah.
Is God cruel to have brought us into this world?
Yeah.
Or is it beneficent to have given us the free will to exist in this horrible, horrible world?
And like we said, George said that he keeps failing to finish his series. The stories get beyond him. George talks constantly about how he gardens, and his characters surprise him sometimes. It doesn't always follow his plans. Sometimes his stories expand and his characters go beyond him. The author of Dune, Frank Herbert, said very similar things. Like the final page of the published Dune books by Frank Herbert basically ends with Frank going, the characters got away from me. I don't know what the characters are doing now. They became more and greater and more surprising than I thought they could be, and that's beautiful. So in the same way that the Sand Kings break out of the cage in this story, in the same way that George Martin's Westeros characters have gone beyond his ability to contain them, and the series spiraled out of his control.
Every story he gardens takes over his house the way the Sand Kings take over Simon's house.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And like maybe that is how one is a god, or at least is a creative mind.
Yeah, have humans escaped God's garden?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is it not the best and most beautiful outcome that our creations go beyond us? Is that not what parenthood is?
Parenthood is an interesting theme in this story because, it's an obvious line to draw between God and parenthood over, like, ownership of a child. Ownership? Is that the... Sorry if that's insensitive. I don't mean to... You know what I'm getting at. In the TV adaptation, in the Outer Wilds Sand Kings, parenthood is a much more transparent theme.
That's a good point.
It's so interesting what Melinda did with the story.
Yeah, so the Outer Limits TV adaptation of Sand Kings was adapted by George's friend Melinda Snodgrass.
And longtime collaborator.
Melinda wrote a bunch of Wildcards stories, and Melinda also wrote some episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. We should watch those episodes.
We definitely should.
I would love to do some TNG chats.
She also was like the show's grand story editor through its second and third seasons.
That's awesome. Yeah, we got to watch some Star Trek. But I think that's such a good point because the TV adaptation of Sand Kings introduces this family element because the main character Simon has his son Josh, is it?
Yep.
And also his father is in the story. So it's the father and the son.
And his brother's ghost looms over the story as well.
Yeah, which and like family is not present in George's original Sandkings story, but of course family is so present in Westeros.
Yeah.
And daddy issues, like Simon in the TV adaptation, Simon feels like he doesn't have his father's approval, and he's largely motivated by trying to prove himself to his father. And that is very much a part of Westeros, like, the Lannister family, or, Cersei and Tyrion and Jaime all desperately want to impress Tywin.
And, Ned's brother's ghost looms over his life.
Yeah, and you're so right that all of those family issues connect to the sort of creator god issues, and the idea of like sort of escaping the control of your parent.
Do I let my child run free in the garden, or do I try and prune it?
And the way that Cress's evil is reflected in his twisted creations of the Sand Kings.
Absolutely.
In the same way that Tywin's evil is reflected in his twisted children. It's to the creation and parenthood, and it's also connected. Yeah, it's a great point.
Also, Simon Cress in The Outer Wilds is played by Beau Bridges, the brother of Jeff Bridges, who is not dead, although he is in the story's canonicity. His father is played by Lloyd Bridges, and his son Dylan is played by... his son Josh is played by Dylan Bridges, who is Beau Bridges' son. So it's not just the characters, it's the actors as well. That's a fun little thing.
Yeah, so the main characters, father and son, are played by the actors' actual real-life father and son.
Yeah.
Which is super cute. I love that.
That happens so rarely. It's nice to see.
So as we said, the Sand Kings, it's like an ant colony led by the queen. The drones are called the mobiles, and the queen is called the Maw. And they are a hive mind. They're all connected telepathically. And it's so interesting that George Martin has written about hive minds so many times.
So many times.
Like, in the Game of Thrones books, the White Walkers control the Whites in a similar sort of like telepathic hive mind way. And the old gods, the Weirwoods, are a kind of a hive mind of souls.
Telepathically connected, and the Green Seers tap into that, yep.
All of which is a bit... It's kept pretty vague
and
in
the
Westeros.
Undying, I think, is a pretty overt hive mind.
Oh, yeah, because there's the central heart thing.
Yes, the same way that the Sand Kings have their central Maw and their mobiles. I think the Undying is the closest to an overt hive mind in Ice and Fire.
That's cool. I hadn't thought of it like that.
Then there's the Silence as well, which is, like, you could think of as a hive mind. Like, is Euron telepathically controlling his sailors on the Silence? They are drones. He's cut out their tongues. They don't,
I would love if there was a reveal that Euron is like a super skin changer who is... I mean, there is a theory about Euron skin changing the Dusky Woman.
Of course, and he does it at will all the time.
Yeah, no, that would be horrifying. And of course, there is also skin changers like Varamir, who control like 6 different animals. So like, George Martin has written about hive minds even more explicitly in his science fiction work. We talked about, like, in Tough Voyaging, Guardians, there's the mud pots.
And then in A Song for Leah... The
Grishka. Men of Greywater Station has like a hive mind alien fungus. He keeps coming back to hive minds. And I think that like why he keeps coming back to hive minds is that it's a metaphor for human connection and togetherness. And it's about like the desire for togetherness and the seduction of wanting to be connected, but it's also about the cost of togetherness, which is that you can lose yourself.
Yeah, and the beauty of individuality and freedom.
Yeah. I think George...
Maybe that is like the fundamental conflict of the human heart with itself. The desire for connectedness and the beauty of individuality and freedom.
Yeah, I mean, it's about the impossibility to coexist without sacrificing part of yourself.
Yeah, totally.
I was not expecting to get this deep this quick.
Yeah, we're not even through the visual novel yet.
We were just going to talk about alien bugs, man. But you're right. Like, I think it's about the...
Well, Sand Kings is George's, like... It's everything. It gets it and it's incredible how he manages to shove all of this stuff into 40 pages. It's unimaginably efficient writing.
It is. I think that the plot is very, like, finely, intricately, efficiently written. There's a lot of little elements that just come together really logically, like
Yes.
even small things like the way that, like, you know, the car is parked out front, but then he can't get into it because of the fingerprint, and then the bug gets in there to scare him off, and then the thing, and like there's elements that come together in like a clever way.
The party guests being used as sacrifices.
It is funny that George Martin writes in Dream Songs that when he wrote Sandkings, he thought, yeah, Sandkings is
It's
pretty
a pretty good story.
But, it's
but
not
the
as-
Ice Dragon, oh, that one's really going to go gangbusters. And you know what? The Ice Dragon has gone a bit gangbusters. Let's not mince around the bush here.
mince around the bush. What I do on my Sunday nights is my responsibility, Glidus. I'll mince wherever I choose.
He also wrote The Way of Cross and Dragon around the same time.
I mean, it's incredible how productive George Martin was in some of these years. He was pumping out these, like, badass, diverse, efficient, concise short stories every other... Like, he wrote multiple a year, many award-winning. God damn, when you've got deadlines and a negative drafting account breathing down your neck, you get a lot done, as it turns out.
Also, you know, he was in his 30s.
Yeah. Well, I hope that when I reach my 30s, I'm going to be really productive.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, any minute now. Yeah, hive minds, huh? The word more.
Can't live with them, can't live with
Human connection, huh? Can't live. Yeah. The word more is used for like the queen of the hive mind, and more is a pun. It's M-A-W, meaning more like a mouth, but it's also more as in like me more, as in mother, as in ma, because it's the mother of all the Sand Kings.
There's a lot of Freud going on there, isn't there? With mother and devour and... Sorry, let's move on.
Yeah, I see where you're going though. There's gender, all as Abigail Thorne said, just full of gender.
Gender written
It's
all over
chock
this thing.
full of gender. And so he buys the Sand Kings, and Cress wants the pets mostly as a way to entertain his friends, and he wants the Sand Kings to fight as a way to entertain his friends. And yeah, Woe explains that the Sand Kings like to carve these images of their owner's face into their castles as a form of like worship, just like the weirwood faces are carved by the children of the forest. And so Cress has the Sand Kings installed at his home, and he hosts some parties.
Can you go back to the page of the installation? Those workers there, those are Sand King mobiles, because Shade is the Sand King more, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, it's a very cool reveal where, you know, the installers come and Cress is like, oh, these are some weird aliens who have 4 arms and 2 legs, and it's only at the end that we realize that those aliens are in fact highly evolved Sand Kings, which are the 6-legged bugs. It all comes together in quite a neat way.
Yeah.
And as we said, it makes Woe and Shade's motivations all the more intriguing, you know?
Yeah, they're using their Sand Kings to get Crest to do something.
Yeah. I think one of the other elements to the hive mind thing is that hive minds are always seductive but evil in George Martin stories.
Yeah.
Like, you always kind of want to be a part of it, but it's always an abomination to control another mind, you know? As Bran is discovering.
And in A Song for Leah, so Leah joins the hive mind, and it's great for her, but her lover Rob on the other side, it's the biggest tragedy of his life.
It's beautiful to be part of a unity, but it's evil to give up yourself. So Cress hosts these parties where all of his douchebag friends hang out, and he wants to impress them by making the Sand Kings fight. And the way he does that is that he starves the Sand Kings. He withholds food to make them hungry enough to fight. And some of his party guests are outraged by this, and they storm out of the party. But that's okay, because Cress, quote, considered his parties a failure unless at least one guest walked out in high dudgeon.
I mean, it's a step down from a Dothraki wedding.
Because in Game of Thrones it says that a Dothraki wedding without at least 3 deaths is deemed a dull affair.
But it's interesting seeing, like, even little linguistic turns like that recurring 16 years later in George's writing.
Yeah, I wonder if he even realizes sometimes.
Probably not.
Yeah.
You can't catch every single... You know, people speak in patterns.
Had you heard the term high dudgeon before?
I don't think so.
I hadn't. I had to look it up. So, like, apparently, dudgeon is like a old word for a kind of wood that's used to make the hilt of a dagger. And so high dudgeon is also used as a phrase to mean, like, being all indignant and angry and storming out. So that's how George uses it. But I'd never heard that word, dudgeon. That's a fun one. Word of the day. So, Cress's ex, Kath, is outraged by the Sand King fights, and she storms out. And I think that, this sort of, like, gladiatorial combat that Cress is staging, like forcing these creatures to fight for his entertainment, it reminds us of the pit fights at Daznak's Pit in Game of Thrones, in Slaver's Bay. And it reminds us of the fights in A Beast for Norn in Tough Voyaging, where, again, animals are forced to fight each other for entertainment. I think that, obviously, like, forced combat is, it's an evil to explore, but it's also a very fun, dramatic, cinematic kind of thing to put in a story, right? Like, what could be more dramatic than gladiatorial combat? So I think that's part of why George Martin keeps reusing that. And so Woe objects to the fighting as well, and I think, as we said, she has that really interesting take where she doesn't say, like, don't make the Sand Kings fight. She says let them fight for their own reasons in their own way.
Maybe, like, if the Sand Kings are a metaphor for I mean, obviously the Sand Kings are metaphors for humanity. Like, humans are going to find something to fight about.
Yeah.
Because we're individualistic and we develop our own, reasoning and things to care about. But then Simon depraves them of resources, and these resource wars break out, and they're a lot more disgusting.
Yeah.
They're not about anything other than survival.
Well, conflict is part of how we define ourselves.
Yeah.
But only when it's our conflict, not fighting for someone else's conflict. I think, like, part of this is about nature, right? Like, it's about humans' relationship to nature, and, like, to what extent should we be allowed to use nature for our entertainment? Like, is it okay to have pets? Is it okay to impress our cruelty onto nature? And I think that, like, the Children of the Forest and the old gods in Game of Thrones are nature, and it's told to us that it is horrific and wrong the way that humans cut down the weirwoods and fought back the Children of the Forest and the giants and stuff. But, like, it also reminds us that, nature be crazy, though.
Nature do be real crazy.
Nature be crazy and violent and scary. And, like, I think that there's a really widespread attitude that a lot of us have that's like, oh, well, nature is perfect and beautiful and normal and natural. And it's great, and, like, we all should just embrace the natural way because that's less violent and bad.
But, like, love is free. Let's all go.
I don't know if you've ever seen a lion eat a zebra, but, like, nature is awful, dude. Nature, like, animals are eating each other and mutilating each other and dying of disease all the time. Like, nature involves an awful lot of suffering. Am I crazy?
No,
nature's awful.
I think nature is beautiful, and also, it's Galadriel. It's beautiful and terrible to behold.
Yeah. I think that there's a mistake to romanticize nature to the point of thinking that it's not violent and awful. But the reason why humans are more awful than nature is that humans know that we're doing evil when we do evil, whereas nature doesn't have the ability to recognize its own evil.
Oftentimes, the violence and savagery is in pursuit of things that aren't really all that important, whereas when the lion eats the zebra, it'll die if it doesn't do that.
Yeah, true. Humans do violence for much more abstract, made-up reasons, whereas nature does violence for survival. Again, we're going much deeper than we need to.
Yeah, it's about alien bugs. It's actually not that deep.
But I think that is part of it. It's not like the Sand Kings are just gonna be kumbaya if you don't make them fight. They're gonna fight.
Yeah, they're animals.
Yeah, as are we all. So Cress gets increasingly egomaniacal. He thinks of himself as the god of the Sand Kings. And as he gets more awful, the faces that are carved by the Sand Kings get like menacing and sinister. I think it's like the portrait of Dorian Gray, which is like that story where the person's immortal and he looks nice forever, but the face gets all nasty. And Cress's friend Jad looses a sand spider into the enclosure to fight the Sand King.
Jad Rakis. George has always been awesome at naming people, by the way.
It is an awesome name. And the sand spider made me think of the ice spiders in Game of Thrones, of course. But also, like, the Sand Kings defend themselves from the sand spider by blocking off the gates and blocking off the tunnels, filling them with sand and stone
the way
to
that
protect
the Night's
queen.
Watch. Okay.
Like how the
That's
Night's
cool.
Watch talk about blocking off the tunnels through the wall to stop the White Walkers. So there's all these little reused ideas.
Yeah.
Kath sends a police person to stop Cress from abusing the Sand Kings. I thought it was cool that instead of using the word policeman or policewoman, the word used is policer.
Yeah. It's a like science fiction. This could be what we call them in the future. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, it's a gender neutral word for someone who is a police person rather than police person or policeman or I kind of like that word. And then Cress bribes the policer. And Cress decides to taunt Kath by making a recording of his Sand Kings killing a puppy.
This is a callback to Kath leaving. Well, Cress left Kath because Kath got so upset when Cress's Shambler ate Kath's puppy.
So again, like, George is giving us no opportunity to actually like Cress at any point. It's made extremely clear that he's awful. And so the faces that the Sand Kings carve get increasingly evil looking, and Cress gets angry and he stabs the White Moor with a sword. This is a dream of spring.
Yeah.
This is how Jon Snow defeats the White Walkers, by stabbing the great other with Lightbringer, in my opinion.
Well, is Simon defeating the Sand Kings here?
Well, no. In this case, he's failing. He's merely wounding.
Do you think that Jon Snow will have a better fate at stabbing the White Hart?
Probably. I mean, what you actually could say is that this is not how Jon Snow will defeat the White Walkers. This is more how the White Walkers were created when Azor Ahai stabbed Nissa. That might be more of what's going on.
Right, and
here.
what we see later of the White Sand Kings are what the White Walkers are in the current Ice and Fire paradigm.
Yes, because there's a description later, which I think is really revealing, when Woe tells Cress that he's an idiot, and she says that these awful Sand Kings, the evil Sand Kings, this is your own doing. You turned yours into something evil with starvation and torture. You made them what they are. The Moor in your cellar is sick, still suffering from the wound you gave it. It is probably insane. I think that's what the Great Other is. I think that what the White Walkers are in the Game of Thrones books is something that's been damaged or wronged by humans, and I think that the sin that was done was Azor Ahai stabbing Nissa, or it was like a human doing something to a child of the forest. There's all this ancient legend in Westeros that all dance around this theme of like a man stabbing a woman and something bad happening. I think that's what created the White Walkers, and I think that it's reflected in this idea of like a sick, damaged white Moor.
It's interesting that you bring up that motif when several pages later Cress stabs a woman in front of the Moor that he just stabbed. Like, Kath, when Cress kills Kath in front of, like, and then the Sand Kings break out of the tank, it's a blood sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's Azor Ahai killing Nissa, and the hive mind goes insane.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. That's a much closer analogy. Yeah, Cress stabs the woman.
And I do need to make a note that this is a ceremonial throwing sword. It's a ceremonial sword. It's a special sword.
It's a special sword, yeah. Just like Lightbringer was the specially forged sword by Azor Ahai.
And he killed his former lover, who was just trying to end the suffering. And then the hive mind breaks out, goes insane, and takes over his world.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're so right. It's exactly the same. Azor Ahai stabs Nissa, and the White Walkers escape evil. Cress stabs Kath, and the White Sand Kings escape evil.
Bloodstone Emperor, yada yada yada.
Yeah, fill in the blanks.
It really is Mad Libs.
Yeah, if you just took every George Martin story and threw it in a blender, that's how the other short stories are made. Yeah, my goodness. All right. So yeah, Cress gets a little bit stressed after the murders that he did. He does like try and punish the Sand Kings by like
ecological
making rain.
torture. That's what that is. Is that the Long Night?
Yeah, it's a bit like the Long Night. I mean, it's also like the flood that God sends to punish humanity.
The breaking of the neck, the flooding, the breaking of the arm of dawn, the flooding of the neck. You know how it is.
Yeah. You know how it is. So Cress gets a bit stressed after his murder, and so he just drinks heavily.
As you do.
He reminds me so much of Cersei. Like, as the story goes on, Cress just drinks more and more and makes worse and worse decisions, which is exactly what Cersei Lannister does in A Feast for Crows.
Do you think Cersei's being overtaken by a hive mind of her own creation, something that she has driven insane of her own short-sighted volition?
There's her children.
Yeah.
I think
Sure.
I think Cersei, like, tragically, like, for better or worse, Cersei has been too impotent to really make anyone crazy. Like, I think, like...
Other than herself.
Yeah, I mean, Cersei's driven herself crazy. Who else is... I mean, Jaime is tortured by Cersei's behavior a bit, but, you know...
He seems relatively sane.
Yeah, well, I mean... Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Cersei's another kettle of fish.
Sanity is it's a long scale.
I also found it really funny that, like, while all of this insanity is going on, George pauses to describe Cress eating food several times. Yeah. It's like, oh, you know, he murdered Kath, and then he was tortured by the feelings, and then he ate a light lunch, and then he had a full breakfast, and it's like, hell yeah, George, hell yeah, George,
never change.
And yeah, he feeds another one of his friends to the Sandkings. Because
we sort of glossed over that bit. So after he kills Kath, he's like, oh god, what am I gonna do? And it's like, oh, actually, I sort of have a body disposal unit in my house already.
Yeah, he feeds Kath's corpse and Idie's corpse.
More specifically, the Sandkings drag Kath's corpse down into the wine cellar where the Whites are setting up their new castle. And then he's like, oh, you guys will need some help digesting that. So he hacks up her corpse.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't skip over the visceral, grisly horror that George puts in here.
Yes.
Because George is a fantasy writer and he's a sci-fi writer. He's also a horror writer.
I think horror might be the most pervasive element of his writing in general.
Yeah, it's always there. And mystery as well, of course, is part of it. I mean, mystery and horror are so connected for him. Because it's always about what you don't describe.
Well, mystery and horror, when you put them in the blender, what you get is a thriller. George writes thrillers.
He's just a genre magician, isn't he?
He really is. And, like, that's what... In Dream Songs, where Sandkings is collected along with a lot of George's other stories, this is in the section of... What's he call them? Mix-ups and mystery...
Mashups, hybrids, monsters.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's going on here. He's mashing up all the genres he loves.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's so good at it.
The horror element is something that I wish was stronger in the TV adaptation on Outer Limits. Because, like, there's a bit of the horror there, but I think that it could have been powerful by just... I don't know, adding a bit more suspense, a bit less said and a bit less seen. Like, there's a lot of moments where there's a lot of CGI bugs running around in the episodes, and it's like, I think they could have saved some money and been more horrifying if they maybe were slightly more subtle.
With a bit less stipulation on what exactly was going on, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it's 1995 and CG is still young.
So, another horrifying element is that while Edie is being eaten, it takes hours. He hears noises for hours.
Yep, the screaming goes for hours.
As Edie is being eaten. It's like, oh, God.
No, Edie was a loose end that Simon needed to tie up because Edie helped him put together the hologram of the puppy being eaten by the Sandkings.
Do you think Edie was named after Amin?
I have no idea.
Actually, when was Idi Amin
a long time?
Because this was written in 1979.
Idi Amin was in charge for a very long time.
I wonder if George Martin knew about Idi Amin when he was writing about
George R.R. Martin knew and knows about a lot of things. Yeah. He's a very smart man.
He is a smart man.
He knows a lot of facts and words.
George Martin is proud of his intelligence.
Oh, yeah?
And so are some of his characters. So Cress, in this story, quote...
Oh, you think you're good at segues, don't you?
Oh, I'm a segue genius. Because Sandkings says that Cress congratulated himself on his genius and, quote, always prided himself on his cunning. And I think there are very strong notes of Tyrion Lannister in here. And
I love that he's priding himself on his cunning while dealing with this ridiculous situation that's going to get him killed of his own creation. Very Tyrion Lannister of you.
Well, well, that's so true, isn't it? Because, like like Cress and Tyrion and Wyman and many of them, they all and
Doran Martell.
Doran, they all congratulate themselves on their genius plans while marching to their own doom and
Of their own creation.
yeah, they're flattering themselves on the way to destroying
It's
themselves.
so juicy. I love it when people do that.
It's wonderful.
You could have done none of this. You're congratulating yourself on dying for no reason.
So Cress tries and fails to kill the Sand Kings with like poison gas and stuff. So he decides he needs some help. So he calls a mercenary to bring a few mercenaries to come and destroy the Sand Kings. They succeed in killing 2 of the Sand King colonies, but the Sand Kings kill some of the mercenaries. And then, like, as they're at the precipice of the white Sand Kings who are hiding down in the cellar.
I do want to point out before you go into that they do destroy the blacks and the reds with fire and laser blasts and explosions. I think that's dragons.
Yeah, I mean, they use flamethrowers, which are described as, quote, long tongues of blue and scarlet fire. And you can't not think of George's dragons, the dragon flame, because in the Game of Thrones books, each dragon has different colored fire. And George loves, we were just talking about the rainbows and the color in this story. And it's in the fire as well. The dragon fire in Ice and Fire and the dragon fire, the flamethrowers here. I thought it was really cute how, like, there's all these rainbows in the Sand Kings story. In the Outer Limits TV adaptation of this story, they don't have the Rainbow Bifrost Bridge. They don't have the flecks of thing that he puts into the Sand Kings. They don't have the multicolored flamethrowers.
There's also only 2 breeds of Sand Kings that he has. There's only the red ones and the white ones.
It doesn't have all of that color, but in the TV adaptation, Cress's wife makes colorful stained glass windows as her occupation. And Cress gets one of these colorful stained glass windows and puts it up on the barn where he keeps his Sand Kings. So they did put rainbow colorful glass in there.
Cool.
As like just a little beautiful nod to the color that George loves so much.
That's cool.
Yeah, I thought that was
I didn't
neat.
pick up on that. Well done. Another thing in relation to dragons, Woe tells Simon that the dragons, that the Sand Kings will grow to suit the size of their enclosure. Like the dragons are being confined by the dragon pit and the cellar in Marine where Dany has to chain up Rhaegal and Viserion.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's that idea of like an uncontrollable power that will just keep consuming however much you allow it to consume, and like how can power be safely grasped, or is sorcery a sword without a hilt?
Without a dungeon. Without a dungeon.
Without a dungeon, yeah.
Dagger without a dungeon.
A dagger without a dungeon. Not quite as poetic. Lysandra the mercenary says, oh, we're going to have to like burn the white Sand Kings with flamethrowers, and Cress is like, I don't want you to use fire in my house. And then Lysandra says, there are worse things than fire, Simon.
Ooh.
It just struck me as such an incredibly ominous line. Like, I don't really know what Lysandra means when she says there are worse things than fire. Like, is she saying that, oh, well, it's worse to have the Sand Kings in your house? Like, I don't even know, but it's like, it's that idea of like the unknown is what's scary.
Yeah, yeah.
And Cress discovers what is more horrifying than fire when he gets eaten by ants with his face at the end of this story. You know, that's what's worse than fire.
That'd do it.
But like, there's all these incredibly wonderful, scary descriptions of like the White Sand King lair down below in the wine cellar.
Right, yeah, it takes over the cellar, and the cellar door cellar door. There it is again.
The septon.
Yeah, Tolkien's favorite word. It becomes the mouth of the White Moor, and like it's this white fungal, moist, warm chamber that's breathing. Simon feels it breathing on him. The wind gushes past him and then back out.
It's a bit like the Black Gate that Bran Stark goes through.
It's exactly like the Black Gate.
Because that's a white weirwood moor that he steps through.
And it's also, he gives human blood sacrifices to it the way that we theorize, or some of us theorize, was done at the Black Gate. Which also is the mouth of God, because it's a weirwood mouth.
Yep. And, you know, the books say that people do blood sacrifices to weirwoods, and, you know, Cress sacrifices to the white Sand King more by pushing Lysandra down there and stuff. So, And it also reminds me of the Winterfell crypts. Like, in the same way that there's this scary subterranean space where, like, the dead or the supernatural lurk down there.
Isn't the wind made note of in the Winterfell crypts?
Well, yeah, maybe the chill,
Yeah.
certainly. But there's something very mysterious and scary about that.
Do you think the Winterfell crypts are the mouth of a hive mind creature? Maybe that'd be crazy.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea that the crypts in Winterfell are some kind of a prison for, like, the spirits of the Stark Kings to prevent them joining the Old Gods network, or to prevent them becoming White Walkers, or to prevent them from rising again as Whites.
Or as punishment, so that they can't join the everlasting hive mind union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of those elements that I vaguely remember from 40k is the idea that,
Wow.
like, I know, the Eldar in Warhammer 40,000, the problem is that there's this evil god called Slanesh that eats their souls after they die.
That I would call that a problem.
It's pretty high up their list of problems. So they don't get to go to the afterlife. Their souls get eaten. And the way that they get around this is that they have these things called soul stones on their armor, so that if they're killed in battle, their soul does not get eaten by Slanesh. It goes inside the gem or something. I'm probably wrong about this. I don't know much about 40k. I've just heard this. And so yeah, that idea of, like, being blocked from your afterlife, your rightful afterlife, by some artificial means is really, really horrifying.
It's an idea that's occurred across, like, organic human cultures.
Yeah. And of course, in Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 4, we see the dead Stark Kings of Winter emerging from the crypts as zombies, as Whites. So, like, this is all, it's all there. And so, yeah, Cress betrays the last couple of mercenaries and feeds them to the White Moor below.
Because here's the thing, he's feeling hungry.
Yes.
Cress is feeling his hunger, and he knows it's not his hunger. He knows it's he knows that he's becoming a servant of the White Moor.
Yeah. And I think this is very similar to how figures like Quaithe and Euron potentially... Well, yeah, and Euron.
Bloodraven, potentially.
Bloodraven. In Westeros, lots of these magical, telepathic people influence people subtly through dreams and visions. But it's much more explicit in George Martin's science fiction stuff. Like in Men of Greywater Station, the alien hive mind fungus gives dreams to the characters to manipulate them to feed the hive mind.
That same idea happens in Night Flyers, doesn't it? Of manipulating dreams to serve the ghost hive, the thing.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, when Cress sacrifices the mercenaries, he says that he's, quote, making a peace with the White Sand Kings.
Yeah.
What he's doing is obviously evil, killing these humans and feeding them to the monster, but he says he's making a peace. And to me, that reminds me of Craster sacrificing his babies to the White Walkers in Game of Thrones.
Right.
And the Night's King and the Corpse Queen sacrificing to the White Walkers in Game of Thrones history. So I think there's this idea that, like, you can try and make a deal with the White Walkers, but you shouldn't. Just like Cress shouldn't make a deal with the White Sand Kings by sacrificing humans to them. And, like, sacrifice to the White Weirwoods, you know? It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing.
Maybe blood sacrifice is just, like, sort of always not the vibe.
I don't recommend it. So, yeah, Cress is becoming like a servant of these telepathic, scary, inhuman Sand King monsters. And at the same time, he's thinking, quote, it wouldn't hurt him. He was God.
Yeah.
That's Euron, right?
Yes.
Euron is being used by the White Walkers, used by the Great Others. He thinks that he's going to be a god, but he's actually a tool of the Great Evil.
I'm increasingly thinking that it's also Bloodraven. I think that Bloodraven has found himself, you know, thinking that he can utilize the power of this Unity hive mind magical weirwood network shit.
Yeah.
Only to find that it has enveloped him.
Yeah.
And now he is a puppet of it.
I agree. Because, like, the fandom...
And Bran's story will be a rejection of Bloodraven's story, perhaps.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that, like, the fandom, the Game of Thrones book fans, are so divided on Bloodraven. Like, some people are like, Bloodraven's the most powerful person in the story. He's been manipulating everything for hundreds of years. And some people say, no, Bloodraven is just a puppet. He's not even Bloodraven. He's not even the Three-Eyed Crow. He's just a tool of the Children of the Forest and the Old Gods. And I think that, like, kind of both of those takes are true. And I think it's very evident when, like, Bloodraven successfully lures Bran and Jojen and Mira and Hodor north. But then you see him, and he's just this confused, doddery old man who's plugged into a tree, who can't even move, who has elf pixie hippies wiping his bum. Like, that's what Bloodraven, the all-powerful schemer, is now. And it's like, he's actually just a meat puppet. That's maybe not what we want to become.
Maybe this isn't the fantasy coming of age, grow into your powers quest that I thought it was going to be.
Uh-oh.
Time to eat my best friend.
So Cress sacrifices more and more people to the White Sandkings.
More and more to the more.
More to the more.
There you go. He feeds, is it 9 party guests to them? I think over the course of the story, he kills 16 or 15 people.
The kill count is high. And all of this, like, telepathic manipulation reminds me as well of the story Never Kill Man, Seven Times Never Kill Man.
Never, so on and so forth.
When the Jane-Shi monsters and their pyramids, which also have these images on them, like the weird, the Weirwoods, they like telepathically manipulate humans to sacrifice humans. So again, like an alien hive mind manipulating humans to sacrifice themselves for the hive mind.
He's just writing. We've said it before. Yeah. It's all the same.
Yeah. So basically everything goes terribly, terribly wrong. And all these people die.
Tits up, cocks up, flamingo up, albatross up, any sort of bird you can imagine up.
You see, we can't get demonetized because you were referring to the birds.
Yes, the YouTube auto detection will figure that one out.
They'll understand. So Cress finally talks to Woe and is like,
I love that her name is Woe. It's so fun to talk about.
Whoa, man.
Whoa.
And she's like, you're an idiot, but I'll save you anyway. And so she comes along and she tells Cress to leave and she'll pick him up.
Do you think she actually intended on doing that?
Probably. Because she could have just, like, if she wanted him to die, she could have just hung up.
Yeah.
But the last sort of dramatic bit is that Cress, marches off alone into the wastes.
Wanders through the desert.
And he sees figures in the distance and he realizes that they are not human. They are, in fact, the orange Sand King colony that escaped.
It's sort of left out in the visual novel, but in the short story, the hope that the children playing in the yard represents is quite pronounced. And then the realization that they're actually six-limbed and made in the visage of a twisted, cruel god that is Simon. that dawning on him, I feel, is a lot stronger. It's the strongest in the short story.
Yeah, you're right. It's a powerful moment when he thinks he has salvation.
Yeah,
and I mean, and he realizes that his salvation is other human beings.
Yes,
because
other individual human beings.
I think that this story is about a lot of things, but I think one of the things that it's about is loneliness. A lot of George Martin's stories are about loneliness. He wrote a song called The Lonely Songs of Laren Dor. It's about loneliness. It's about heartbreak. But one of the things about Simon Cress is that, he hosts all these parties. He has all these friends. But he doesn't seem to actually be close to any of them.
He likes impressing them, but that's so that he can feel good about himself.
His relationships all seem really superficial.
Yeah, and egocentric, self-centric.
And so I think that is, of course, like a thematic counterpoint to the hive minds. Like George is always writing about loneliness, and he's also writing about the allure of the hive mind, of togetherness, of connection. And so I think it's so cool that, like, Cress is running to escape from the hive mind, but what he runs towards, what he thinks is his salvation, is other people.
Human community.
People are the only salvation that there is. And so I think it's about Cress's failure as a human being is that he doesn't empathize with others, and he manipulates, and he doesn't empathize with aliens and pets as well. If Cress had empathy, none of this would have happened.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have murdered those people.
He wouldn't have underfed the Sand Kings.
Yeah. Every mistake he made was a failure of empathy, a failure to connect. And so it's in his final moments that he's like, there's some people are my salvation. And then he dies. And he dies, he's eaten by Sand Kings that have his face. It's the self that eats him.
He's consumed by his own ego.
Yeah. Yeah, by the twisted reflection of himself that he created. It's wonderful poetic justice. It's karma. It's the evil that he put in the world coming back to bite him. On the bum.
And elsewhere.
So is that what this story is? I think we just told the story of Sandkings.
It's fun how you opened the stream with a really quick summary, and then the second segment of the stream was a much slower summary.
Well, that's an essay structure.
It really is.
We're almost as organized as that tosspot Alt Shift X if we're not careful.
But, the video didn't go swooshy at all.
Yeah, it didn't
across this
swoosh a
live stream.
single time. So yeah, is there anything else that we can take from this story?
No, I think it's pretty simple.
I think it's pretty simple.
Yeah. The four-armed Sand Kings remind me of that one guy from Ben 10.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I think it's about loneliness and connection, hive minds and togetherness. It's about cruelty. It's about godlike delusions blowing up in our faces. And it's about alien bugs.
And it's about how you, under all circumstances, should
avoid incest at all costs.
Just in case you were wondering.
Yeah.
Just if you need to clarify George's position there.
Well, sometimes I feel as though it does need a bit of clarification.
Our soundboard is so good now.
It's goated.
Would you like to talk about the TV adaptation?
I really would. It's so interesting that this exists.
Yeah, I mean, is this the first TV adaptation of a George Martin published story?
I couldn't tell you, but it feels like it could be.
I'm pretty sure it is, because George Martin did write Twilight Zone episodes. He did write Beauty and the Beast episodes.
Those weren't independent short stories before those. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, this is a separately published George Martin short story that was adapted to television, and I think that this is the first time that happened.
Well, the Night Flyers film, when
Yeah.
was that?
The Night Flyers film was before this.
But that's not a TV episode.
I'm cutting hairs.
Well,
here.
you're being so specific that the award cannot be taken away. You know those Guinness World Records where they, instead of giving it to whoever would actually own it, we'll just change the title so that you can keep the
I
award.
always think we're the fourth most popular folk band in New Zealand. If you make it specific enough.
It'll sound impressive.
Well, it's unique, I know that. Sandkings is unique.
Very much so.
And so The Outer Limits was like an anthology science fiction TV show in what, like the 60s?
The
or
60s.
The 70s? It's compared a lot to The Twilight Zone, which I think is generally considered, frankly, better, I think. But
I haven't seen any of it.
in the 90s... You haven't seen any Twilight Zone?
I haven't seen any Outer Limits.
Yeah. Well,
outside
yeah.
from this.
This was the first Outer Limits I've
I've seen
as well.
some Twilight Zone.
Well, I actually want to do a live stream with you ranking every Twilight Zone episode.
That sounds monumental.
We'll have to, yeah. It'll take a while to watch them all.
It sounds
I suppose.
epic in nature, though. Sounds great.
But in the 90s, that they rebooted The Outer Limits, and they're like, okay, let's have some gangbusters, awesome story to start us off with the
this
new
is
reboot.
the premiere of the reboot of The Outer Limits.
And they chose this George Martin story, Sandkings.
At the time was 16 years old. So it's not like this was the new hot, fresh thing going around. It's just like this story had such lasting power.
And it was a successful piece of television. They were nominated for an Emmy. The main character as an actor was nominated. And as we said, the episode was adapted by George's friend, Melinda Snodgrass, author. And this adaptation is very different to the short story in a lot of ways. While the short story is set on an alien world in a science fiction future, the Sandkings episode on Outer Limits
Appears to be set in the Pacific Northwest or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like our world in the 90s. Everyone's got enormous telephones. I love them clacking away at their big computer monitors as they're investigating the alien organisms.
I think that this very fundamental change to the story makes sense in creating this adaptation.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier to stipulate on the details of your science fiction world when you're just writing words.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine a lot of the reason for the change was budgetary. Like, George always said that he was frustrated with his stories having to be smaller and simpler for budgetary reasons. But I think that this adaptation is smart in a lot of ways. Because I think that they don't enter the same degree of horror or, like, fantasticalness or, like, you know, there aren't as many murders and scenes of violence. But they do explore some, like, very different themes that I think are actually really good, like the family stuff and the relationship stuff, and they do start in a way that's a lot more grounded and a lot more realistic. I mean, even like the premise I really like, because in the original story, Cress buys this exotic alien from an exotic alien shop, but in this TV adaptation, they mention that there's been a Mars lander rover that went to Mars and picked up a soil sample from the Martian soil and brought it back to Earth, and they're studying it, and they found, there's some like weird eggs in the Martian soil. Let's like see if we can hatch them in a carefully controlled quarantine facility, and let's try not to let them escape. And it's like, yeah, that's like maybe the most realistic, scientifically plausible way that you could introduce alien life forms to a real world story,
Yep.
I like that.
And I think it makes Cress's obsession with the Sandkings quite organic.
Yeah.
Because he's a scientist whose job it is to study and nurture these things.
Yeah, in the original story, it's a bit contrived that Cress is, like, creating this problem for himself. But here it's like, yeah, this is something that could, like, maybe happen if you will suspend your disbelief enough to believe in alien bugs.
There are plenty of stories of scientists who go crazy with their work. That's a thing that happens.
And it's all based in super relatable emotions. Like, we see that Cress, he seems like an okay guy, but he's basically fired from work because he got too obsessed with the Sandkings and he, like, broke quarantine protocol. So he sort of gets fired, and, like, he's got some relationship tension with his wife, and he's also got, like, daddy issues with his father who never accepted him, and his dead brother. His father loved his dead brother more than he loved him, and it's difficult, balancing work-life balance and raising his son at the same time as working. And it's all just super normal, relatable human stuff.
And also he's raising alien ants.
Like, it's so different to, like, the psychopathic weirdo Simon Cress.
Yeah. This guy doesn't own a carrion hawk in his belfry. There's no shambler that eats puppies.
Yeah. But it does become pretty crazy towards the end.
Yeah.
I thought that the beginning of the episode was really fun, seeing Cress, like, driving to work, listening to his Walkman, and, like, driving into, like, the military-controlled facility while just, like, jamming out to his beats on his headphone. And it's, like, this serious, scary situation, but he's just vibing. I thought it was just a really, like, fun way to start the episode.
I miss when TV did stuff like this.
And so he goes down into the, the facility where they're studying the Sandkings, and it was very silly, I thought, when, like, all the alarms go off and they're like, whoa, bug alert, beep boop, beep boop.
There's a bug in the
vents. But all the purpose of all that is just to establish that Cress is overly enthusiastic about the Sandkings and saving the Sandkings, and so eventually the government and the funders decide to shut the whole project down because it's too dangerous, and so Cress steals some of the soil, which he's not meant to do, and takes it back home when the project is meant to be over, and he raises the Sandkings at home instead.
In his big old barn that's completely disused.
I liked a lot of the writing between Simon and Dave, who's like his boss, colleague guy.
Has the same name as his dead brother.
Which is weird,
It's a
right?
very strange decision to do that when you're writing something. Because people have the same names in real life all the time. I'm beset by Davids. But in fiction, like, when you're writing a story, it's quite strange to have two characters with the same name when there are only, like, 5 characters in this story.
George Martin once said that, people tell me that you shouldn't have 2 characters whose names begin with the same letter in one story because, you'll confuse your characters. But I have 20 characters named Aegon. Is my George impression getting better or worse?
Much worse.
Much worse.
That's okay, though.
You don't want to confuse your readers by having multiple characters with similar names, let alone the same name, let alone the same Dave.
Yeah.
Why 2 Daves? Two options here. Option 1, Melinda made a mistake. She accidentally named 2 characters Dave and no one noticed.
There's no way it's a mistake.
Well, okay, the other option is they deliberately decided that Cress's feelings about his boss Dave got all mixed up emotionally with his feelings about his brother, and so he feels rivalry and he feels dislike of his colleague Dave because Dave has the same name as his dead brother Dave, which he resents because his father loved his brother Dave more than he loved him. I think that might be it.
Bit of nominative determinism.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that might be it. Because, like,
Simon's just destined to have tension with David.
he too is beset with Daves.
Yeah.
I think that... Because this colleague, Dave, he actually seems like a pretty reasonable guy.
Yeah.
Simon is often combative and, like, has all this friction with his colleague Dave, when Dave, I think, is mostly being pretty reasonable. And in the end, you know, Simon Cress kills Dave in the end. So it's like, I think he's projecting all his resentment.
His dead brother to the Sandkings.
Yeah. God. Yeah. So I think that's what's going on there. I think there's layers.
Yeah, I think it is intentional, and I think it is, like, a thing. I think there is a way to communicate that other than giving them the same names, though.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, who knows what goes on the cutting room floor editing these sorts of stories.
Of course.
So and yeah, I also like that. I also like science fiction where people make logical choices. I think that it's a good logical choice for the government to be like, if these alien Martian organisms, like, keep almost escaping from our facility, maybe we should stop playing with, like, aliens for now. That's a very reasonable, logical decision. I also think it's logical that Simon Cress is like, yeah, but I worked so hard to figure out how to hatch these alien organisms.
This is my life's work, and he's obsessed with earning a Nobel Prize.
So what we have here is an actual logical clash between characters with logical, reasonable opinions and motivations, which is what should be in stories.
So what we're getting at here is that this is not an accurate adaptation of Sandkings.
Yes.
It's a very different story. It's good. It's still good. It's a good piece of media unto itself. Also, as we'll get to, I think that this is still a faithful adaptation. It's an inaccurate. Is inaccurate the best word I could use for that? It's a very different but still quite faithful adaptation of Sandkings.
You think it captures the heart?
Yes.
Of the story?
I think it is
all the details.
faithful to the ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's about different themes in a lot of ways. I think that's a lot of the themes that it...
That is also true.
I think a lot of the themes that it adds are great, and in some ways, like, better. I mean, it's apples and oranges. They're both great. Why can't fruit be compared?
It just frustrates me that I know there are people out here who would dislike this simply on the grounds that it is different.
Yeah, obviously it's really easy to, like, sit back in your
CinemaSins,
armchair
Bing,
analyst and go, oh, it's
different.
incorrect. It's not identical to the source material. We are not source material purists. We will not poo-poo every single thing that's different to the original. We just like good stories. And, like, if there's a story we love, we like to see it adapted faithfully. We like the heart and the themes and the meaning of it adapted faithfully. But, you know, different mediums can require changes.
Absolutely.
And the original still exists. For
Yeah.
Christ's sake, the original still exists. You
And
can
the visual
still
novel,
read it.
what we've been showing on screen this whole time, the DC visual novel, graphic novel, it's very accurate. It's a very
Yeah, if you want
similar
an
adaptation.
accurate visual adaptation, the graphic novel is there as well.
You can just read the story. It's not that long.
So we talked about how I really like how Simon Cress's wife, Kathy, makes stained glass windows for a living, because I like how that includes George Martin's motif of rainbows and color and stuff. Although I do think that Kathy's crazy if she's working on stained glass in that kind of workshop inside the house. I mean, that's just like a living room, man. Like, if you're working on stained glass, you're going to get broken glass on the ground.
true.
You should be working on it in a shed. That's my opinion. You need like a backyard shed to be working on stained glass.
Also, stained glass in the 90s, I don't know all that much about stained glass, but were all the dyes non-toxic by the 90s?
Well, it is like, is it lead lighting sometimes? Like, it's actual lead is used in like the joints?
Yeah, how
Isn't
how
that
well
part of it?
ventilated is your living room, Kathy?
Maybe all of this is just like the delusion of a lead poisoned mind, and Simon is just, don't lick your fingers while you're working on lead lighting. I also don't know enough about stained glass or lead lighting to know.
Her name is Kathy, which I find is interesting because in the short story, Cress's ex-girlfriend, Kath, is the one he murders when she tries to put an end to the Sandkings.
Whereas in this story, Kath survives. So, yeah, it's interesting.
That seems to be like a sort of a superficial holdover from the short story that doesn't actually mean anything. So, okay, that's a name that occurs there. We'll use it, I guess.
Yeah, there are similarities that are deep and some that are superficial. I like that they have this kid Josh, and Josh likes filming these little videos where he has these like little miniature sets, and he makes monster movies, and his monster is an arachnoid or an arachnothoid, which is like the sand spider in the original Sandkings story.
Right,
There's a spider-like creature in both, so there's a lot of little elements that just are nods to the original story.
Hasn't he
That's
just
nice.
taken a toy spider and like stuck wings onto it?
I don't think we ever get a good look
No.
of the arachnothoid, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. That might be as good as it gets there.
And so, as we said, like, Simon's insecure because his dad loved his dead brother more than he loved him. And, I think I think it's interesting how he becomes a father to the Sandkings. And he's a bad dad.
Yeah.
At the same time as having frustrations with his bad dad. And that causes him to be a bad dad to his son,
his actual
Josh.
son, yeah.
And it's like, all that like generational daddy issues stuff is something that George writes about endlessly.
And it's so interesting that none of that was in the original short story, but it's in so much of George's other work.
Yeah. What did you think of the sexy role play where Simon says to his wife, Simon says, make out with me? What did you think of that?
I think that's...
Do you think that's a turn on, saying Simon says to your partner when your name is Simon?
I think that in relationships, you develop goofy little rituals, and I think that that's fun. I think it's a natural thing that they wrote into the story.
Well, I think it was awful, personally.
You hated it.
I hated it.
I loved later on in the story when Kathy's having her nightmare about Simon killing her by sticking her head into a bathtub full of scorpions.
My God.
That he's like, she incorporates their cute little sexy role play, and he says, I didn't say Simon says, in his crazy face. Beau Bridges, by the way, earned that Emmy nomination. He's fantastic in this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that his performance was really good. He really like sells this descent into madness. I feel like I keep bringing him up, but he did remind me of Stephen Toast, played by Matt Berry on occasion. Yeah, because like he's this husky white man with longer hair than seems entirely necessary. The accent's different, obviously, but for some reason I just kept being reminded of Stephen Toast.
I think you need to discuss this with your therapist.
Yeah, look, maybe it's just me. But yeah, like the story from here is like similar in a lot of ways.
What are we doing talking about Sandkings when we could be talking about Toast of London?
Well, the only thing we'd be saying is that's so funny. We like
so
this.
Funny.
So yeah, Simon Cress, he like raises the Sandkings secretly in his barn, and his family gets really cross that he is neglecting them. And it's a secret, of course, because he stole it from the government. But his motivation is that he wants to win a Nobel Prize, and he wants everyone to see how smart he is. Like it's like Simon keeps saying, I have to prove that the Sandkings are an intelligent species. I have to prove that they're smart. In the same way that Simon is trying to prove that he's smart.
Yeah.
By winning a Nobel Prize to impress his father. And it's tragic because his father turns up at one point and says, hey, we're all worried about you. Can you chill, please? And he rejects his father because he's hurt, and it's like he cannot accept a connection with the person who he is trying to connect with by building alien bugs. My point is that sometimes it's easier to raise a colony of extraterrestrial insects in your basement than it is to have a conversation with your father.
Yeah.
Which I think we can all relate to.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Don't look in my basement.
So again, it's very different to the original story, which, Simon's mostly motivated, at least on the surface, by like petty cruelty and wanting to impress people and just being this thoroughly unlikable douchebag. But here, Simon has very like understandable, normal motivations, leading him to do something extraordinary. I also really liked the set. Because, like, they have this, like, weird old house. It's, like, this weird old stone house, and it's got, like, ivy up the walls, and it's got these gargoyles, these chimera gargoyles, and there's the dilapidated barn out back, which Simon Cress converts into being, like, a church. He does, like, this church Jesus-y pose in front of the stained glass window that he puts up, and that connects to all the, like, divine Messiah vibes.
Yeah,
but, like,
the god of the Sandkings.
And the old stone mansion is, it's the perfect place for a mad scientist, right? 'Cause
Absolutely.
it's all like gothic and it gets stormy and the stone and the gloom, and it's like, it's great choice of set. I don't know where it is, but it's great. At one point, Simon Crest like walks among the Sand Kings, and they divide apart from him. And it's like Moses parting the Red Sea. And so Simon Crest says, "Charlton Heston, eat your heart out." And the reason he says that, because Charlton Heston played Moses parting the Red Sea in the 1956 movie The Ten Commandments.
My goodness.
I had to look that one up.
Yeah, I was hoping you would, because I did.
I kept thinking, like, Simon keeps saying, "I'm going to win a Nobel Prize." Which Nobel Prize does Simon think he's going to win by raising alien ants?
The Nobel Prize for, what would it be?
That's the thing. Like, there's a Nobel Prize for, like, what? Like chemistry
Literature.
and peace and literature. The closest
Physics.
one... There's a Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine is the name of one of the Nobel Prizes. I think that's the closest one. There is no Nobel Prize for xenobiology, Simon. Maybe there is in his timeline.
That's what they pulled the funding for. They were going to... It was going to be a bequeathment to the Nobel Fund.
Right.
To create the Nobel Prize for xenoentomology.
Now that I could get behind.
So if you happen to find some alien birds, you're shit out of luck.
At one point, we're going to have a taxonomy corner at some point to classify these Sand Kings.
They're not bugs.
They're not bugs.
Woe keeps telling us they're not bugs.
At one point, Simon Crest gets stung by a Sand King, and it has this like venom that starts to affect him.
Right, when in the short story, it's made very clear that they are not venomous at all.
Yeah, in the short story, it's the sand spider that's venomous, but the Sand Kings aren't. So again, it's just like grabbing elements and sort of mixing them around. And I guess, the venom is sort of a replacement for the idea of psionic powers, because in the short story, the Sand Kings are kind of psychic to mess with his mind. Whereas in this, there's no psychic powers, but there is the venom which affects his mind, So it's a different mechanism of achieving the same sort of thing of making him go crazy.
Another smart addition to the story, I think, here is that the Sand Kings start building the castle on Simon's fruit tin.
Yeah.
Like the logo of the canned fruit he was eating.
Yeah. So the Sand King's castle building is a mimicry of something that they just happen to see in this story.
Whereas I guess in the short story, it makes sense. Like, fortifications are fortifications. They're going to look a certain way no matter what.
Yeah, like in the short story, it's the Sand King's nature to build castles and to do war. Whereas in this TV adaptation, it seems more like the Sand Kings are mimicking humanity by building castles and by doing war, perhaps. I think it's fine because it's the reflection of Simon and the reflection of humanity that it represents. So yeah, things just get increasingly crazy, and he alienates his family by being too obsessed with the Sand Kings, and eventually he's driven to murder his colleague Dave.
Oh, we've left out the dog.
Oh yeah, the dog gets eaten.
His dad gives his son, so Simon's dad gives Simon's son a dog and then encourages him to name it the same thing as Simon's brother's childhood dog, which is sort of a fucked up thing for him to do.
Yeah. I mean, buying someone a pet without their consent is a fucked up thing to do.
Yeah. And the dog gets into the barn and gets eaten by the Sand Kings. Whereas in the short story, Simon feeds the puppy to the Sand Kings very purposefully.
Yeah. So again, like it's a lot more sort of like logical and understandable, Simon's descent into madness in this one.
The dog is an accident, but it leads him down the same path.
So he murders his colleague, and he starts going quite nuts, possibly partly because of the venom. There's this kind of funny scene where a policer arrives, and he has to hide the car of the colleague Dave who he murdered.
So he's just pushing it, obviously the handbrake off, and he's just shoving a car up his driveway.
But then the car rolls back. It's really goofy slapstick.
Yeah.
And again, it's sort of an adaptation of how Kress has to hide his victims' cars by dumping them in a volcano in the sci-fi story.
Yeah, again, that's not quite that easy to adapt.
What an interesting thing to adapt from a crazy sci-fi thing to a grounded 90s TV show. And, all the choices Melinda had to make. All interesting choices.
Cool.
So the Sand Kings... Fantastic shot. The Sand Kings escape, and his family leaves him. And the Sand Kings are running rampant, so he tries to destroy them. And there's this great, horrifying face of Simon Cress built by the last Sand King colony. and he tries to destroy it. Doesn't this look just like exactly like the Weirwood faces in Game of Thrones? And so he has to destroy the evil hive mind by blowing it up, and he sacrifices himself to destroy the White Walkers. Oops, I mean the White Sandkings.
Hey, that you didn't actually do an oopsie there. You meant to
That
say
was
that.
deliberate all along.
It was a real life oopsie.
Real life oopsie. But while that Sand King colony is destroyed, we find that there's another Sand King colony that escaped that is still out there. And I read that apparently in later episodes of The Outer Limits, they refer to the Sand Kings again, and they mention like, oh, Sand Kings are still out there.
God, that took a long while to clean up.
Yeah, that's cute. It'd be interesting to watch some other episodes.
Yeah, because apparently there's some continuity across this anthology series. Cool.
So yeah, did you like the adaptation?
I did. I had a great time watching it.
Yeah, I think that there were a lot of good choices about like the relatable relationship dynamics as like the motivation for Simon's poor choices.
That's the thing. In like a 40-page science fiction short story, you can get away with having a psychopath protagonist.
Yeah.
In a made-for-TV movie in 1995, when you're trying to launch your new anthology show, I think it's probably a good idea to give people a relatable protagonist.
Yeah, you can imagine the studios saying, hey, we need something grounded, realistic, relatable. And you know, the relatability is a doorway into the insanity that happens towards the end. So they still reach some insanity.
Yeah.
They just get there by way of being relatable. And yeah, for the first episode of the 90s reboot of The Outer Limits, sure, that makes sense. I ain't mad at that. And of course, they did not have the budget to put alien worlds and dozens of murders and characters and, you know. So yeah, I think good decisions were made with the adaptation.
I do wonder what George thinks of this.
Yeah, I don't remember ever hearing him talk about it. I wonder if he worked with Melinda on it at all, because Melinda was
they were working together.
His friend.
Yeah.
I wonder if he contributed much to the adaptation. I mean, I just think
I think he only has a based on credit in the writing of this episode. So if he did so, it's uncredited. You
know that George Martin does have a writing credit on the Night Flyers movie, which I have not seen, but which by all accounts is bad.
Yeah.
And is not faithful. So just having the credit doesn't necessarily mean that you had impact.
Yeah, that sort of creditation is sort of woo.
Yeah. Well, they can justify getting a bigger paycheck, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Sandkings. I think that's pretty cool.
What a great story.
I think it's pretty cool. And I think that it does kind of give away the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire, because I think they all came from, Zora High stabbing Nissa Nissa, releasing the White Walkers. I think that the hive mind connection.
Well, this is all like vague gesturing and philosophical ideas about the ending rather than like the narrative of the ending.
Yes. Well, yes. I can't tell you if Jon Snow will stab the Great Other with Lightbringer, or if he's gonna, crash a dragon.
Or is he gonna be dragged off into the wilderness and be devoured by insects that have his face?
Yeah. No, I think in truth what we're identifying is DNA that is a really strong current. All those same things of sacrifice and hive minds and trees with faces and all these things that recur. Which make it so fascinating to like dig around in George Martin's old stories.
And it is so much fun, and we encourage anyone who's interested to explore. George has so many stories from so many years of his career, and you can glean so much of Ice and Fire from them.
Yeah. Maybe we should check out Night Flyers next.
Night Flyers. Yeah, that's another... ones that have adaptations are great ones for us to talk about.
It's always just inherently fascinating to talk about adaptations, different versions of the same thing, different windows at the same story. So, that was Sandkings.
It was. It still is.
Should we respond to donations? And
that is the only reason I'm doing this.
Yeah, I always have to twist your arm.
Oh, but there'll be donations. Oh, fine, I'll do it. No, thank you very much for for doing this.
And as always, we respond to most of the donations and stuff towards the end of the stream, and You don't have to donate, but if you do, it's better to use the Streamlabs link, which is in the video description, because YouTube takes a large cut of super chats.
We really do need to say that at the start of the stream.
We probably should. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for donating. Here's our responses. So, Plawn.
Hi, Plawn.
Thank you, Plawn, who says, "Hey, Shock Horror and Giallo Cinema. Could you tell my best friend Amis that I am currently eating an absolutely juicy burger right now? Sopping! Get real. Love all the streams. You two give us loads to joke about together."
Thank you. And I am so hungry already, so also sort of fuck you.
Yeah, I'm jealous of the juicy burger. Cetor says, "Are there any chickens? I mean dinosaurs? I mean fish in this story?"
Well, the Sandkings are not bugs. I suppose they could be fish. Huh.
They are six-legged, so why aren't they insects?
Because they're aliens. Insects are a clade that evolved on Earth.
Well, they never establish where the Sandkings come from. Cress, searches up what is the homeworld of the Sandkings,
I suppose
and he
that
doesn't
if you're
know.
on Boulder, something from Earth would be alien.
Yeah. But I mean, also, we don't know that the Sandkings aren't descended from Earth insects.
That is true.
It's set in the far future.
Well, Woe says they're not bugs.
She says they're not insects, yeah, but I mean, what does she know?
Probably a lot. One of them is a co-worker.
Thank you, Molly, who says can't watch live. Hope it's a good stream.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you, Anonymous, who says, "Hi, Glorn and Shlanesh. Been watching for years, first time donating. It's better to donate through Streamlabs."
Thank you, Anonymous.
Thank you, Matt Mooneyham, love the name, who says, "I'm listening to your abridged series again. Hope you're well."
I'm alright. You're right.
I'm alright.
Yeah, good.
I should do another episode.
You
of
really
abridged soon.
should.
A cock abridged.
I can only sleep when you're doing them. It's been a horrible couple of months.
Well, I can't sleep when I am doing them, so
Well, that's
there's the
good.
paradox. Thank you, Tom Fee, who says, "Hello, Glymore and Alt Schweimon Crex. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for the stream."
Thank you.
Thank you, Fu the Mucker,
Fu the Mucker.
who says, "Hello, Glide on my
Father
shaft.
Mucker, I get it. It's the Spoonerism.
I'm happy to see I have another video to fall asleep to as I sink deeper into this paranormal relationship."
Great.
I think they probably meant parasocial relationship.
No,
but
it's paranormal.
I am a ghost.
And you don't want to know what I am. Casey says, "It's 4 a.m. here, and I ought to head to rest. Hope the stream goes good. I think we can all agree it's been fine."
Artem says, "Hi, shingles and glandular fever. Glad to finally catch a stream. Here's a little something to help buy George Martin a burrito next time."
Do you think he's gonna expect us to buy the next one?
I kept thinking he'd give us an invoice, what's his Cash App, so that we can pay back for the burrito, but he didn't.
We've got George Martin's Venmo.
What we actually should do is we should do a tier ranking of every Swift and Glidus silly nickname that we've gotten in a
That
donation.
would take so long.
There have been some extra... I like shingles and glandular fever. There's some really good ones.
I, for one, hate shingles. And I hope shingles dies.
Wow. I've never heard you be so negative.
Have
what did
you-
shingles do to you?
A lot.
Have you had shingles?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
When I was doing season 7 back in
Oh.
2021,
Well,
4 years
now
ago,
I understand.
I had shingles at age 25, and it is so awful.
I think that Dan and Dave should have paid for your medical care
I
for your
actually
shingles, because
should-
they are responsible.
I should send HBO a bill.
Have you seen Brian David Gilbert's Shingles Jingle?
Yes.
Isn't it great?
I related to it.
You should do a Shingles Jingle remix of your own Shingles experience.
It's exactly the same as his.
Thank you, Emma
it sucks so
Crocs on page, who says, "Sansa playing Elaine, but being a clone of Cat is not suspicious because everyone in the Vale would be like, wow, Peter got with any woman that looks like Cat, right when she married a Stark. Extremely likely thing for him to do." Yeah, so I think that in the Game of Thrones books, Littlefinger claims that Sansa is his daughter under an assumed identity and says her name is Elaine. And you're right, it makes sense because if people know that Littlefinger had a crush on Cat, maybe he hooked up with someone who looked like Cat.
He found the sex worker who looked the most like Catelyn Stark. Yeah,
So
yeah.
it does make perfect sense that Littlefinger would have a bastard daughter who looks like Cat. Yeah.
But also, Peter had a relationship with Cat's sister, so that's another explanation.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, you think people think that Sansa is Lysa and Littlefinger's daughter?
I would think that.
Can we prove that she's not?
Yes.
No, you can't.
We,
Have you seen the ultrasounds?
we're in Kat's head for 3 books. She recalls Lewin delivering all of her children.
And Cersei tricked herself into not knowing that she murdered Jon Arryn.
What a great theory.
Thank you, Cade Brimigion, who says, love both your work. The fake John's show is always on repeat for me. I do have a question, though. Who would win in a sword duel between the both of you?
Me.
Hang on now.
You're a ghost.
What gives you such confidence? I can hold ectoplasmic weapons.
I have a special ghost-slaying sword.
Ugh, well, I have a special ghost-slaying sword shield to block it.
Well, I have...
And I'm riding a ghost horse with my ghost
No
lance.
fair, you already went. It's my turn.
Yeah, and the fake Jon Snow, if anyone would like to watch that 23-hour epic in which we discuss Jon Snow, you can watch it on either the Glidus Patreon or the Alt Shift X Patreon or on Nebula, and it's a way to support our channel.
It's a way to kill a weekend. It will be coming to YouTube at some point, hopefully. Oh no, I did the thing where I tell people what I'm working on.
We
and
were
they
just
expect me to
saying,
do
it's
it.
so important not to announce what you're working on.
Shit.
There are... See, now it's going to be another year until the public version of the fake Jon Snow
I'm
comes out.
so sorry, everyone.
Stop provoking him. Don't give him an opportunity to talk about what he's going to
But
do.
it's exciting and it's fun, and I want people to. Oh no!
I'm not telling anyone shit about what I'm working on. I have so many things that I'm excited to release, and I'm not telling anyone.
Genuinely, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Keep it zipped. Thank you, Jesus B, who says, it's 3 a.m. and I see Gligar and Schwiftery streaming. Love listening to you guys talk about anything. Zane says, who out here whitening their walkers?
You gotta keep them bleached.
Thank you, Anonymous, who says, hey,
Gotta brush your walkers.
Shimbob and Glimbimbo. First time catching a stream, and it's when I'm working. A discussion about Dirk Gently would be much appreciated.
We add it to the list if we haven't already.
Yeah, I do love the Dirk Gently books by Douglas Adams, and I am curious about the Dirk Gently TV show, so it is on the list of things that we can maybe talk about.
It's a lengthy list, and we only whittle it down at very irregular intervals.
Whittle. And if anyone has ideas about topics or shows or books that you'd like us to talk about, chuck it in the comments. And we don't promise that we'll get to it, but I really like hearing people's ideas.
We'll definitely read the comment. Artem says, Cersei does a great job of making the reader crazy. That's true. Cersei does have the power to drive you crazy.
You're just screaming at the page, saying, don't set your own castle on fire, and don't have sex with your brother.
Avoid incest at all costs.
I love how, like, he's so like, no, for real. I'm not memeing.
I wish I didn't have to say this. Thank you, Maxime Spiropoulos, who says, Swift and Glidus live on my birthday. Happy birthday, Maxime Spiropoulos. Awesome name as well.
Well done on having a name.
Thank you, Elliot, who says, Yar, shiver me glimbers.
Oh my god.
Gather round, ye syphilitic, scurvy-ridden scum. Riddle me this. What's Euron's favourite letter? Ye might think it's R. Or his first love, the sea. But nay, on the twinkling night sky, I swear 'tis the crow's single black eye.
I feel like I should be paying you for this, Elliot.
I have no idea what the letters refer to, though.
Huh?
Oh, the sea. All right, the sea.
It's a classic
as in
joke
SEA.
that, like, what's a pirate's favorite letter? And the like first response is, well, they love the sea. And it's like, no, they always get stuck at R. It's not a very good joke.
But what's the single black eye? Or
it's
just
his
Euron's-
eye.
Just
Because of his eye.
So is that part of the usual pirate joke?
No,
or is
that's something
changed
that
for
Elliot's
Euron?
made up.
Okay, all right.
That's Elliot
all
being
right.
clever.
Okay, I get it. All right. I was too busy voice acting to.
And we're all really glad that you did that. By the way, I want everyone to appreciate
I think I just saw 100 people leave the live stream stats. As soon as I started talking pirate, we just lost half the viewers.
Yar, I entreat ye, mateys, press the like button.
See, can we please have you do the voice bits from now on?
Well, you just jumped right into it, and we were nipple deep up to your voice acting.
I'm too gung-ho. My problem is that I love doing things that I'm bad at, and being bad at it is not going to stop me from doing it. It will only encourage me.
I don't think that's a problem. I think that that's your greatest strength.
Thank you, Glidus. And thank you, Ally, who says, watching while sick, lads, you're always a good distraction. Now, you're missing a comma there. I think what you were trying to say is, Ali is watching while sick, comma, lads. You're always a good distraction. But I think that Ali accidentally called us sick lads, which I'll take it.
I'm not gonna fight that one. Thank you, Fiatra Collins, who says, was disappointed to learn the fake Jon Snow was filmed over multiple days rather than in one sitting. Also, ye silly geese, the reason Davos is trying to stop Alistair from cremating Jon's corpse is because then Jon wouldn't be able to get into Christian heaven. That does make sense.
I could believe Davos is a church guy.
Well, he certainly is.
He's a sept guy.
Yeah, we actually did film the fake Jon Snow over the course of 8 months, I think it was, that we spent on that one.
8 years.
8 years, right, I forgot.
From the moment that Season 8 aired, we just filmed like 5 minutes of reaction every day.
And that's why it came out 2 years from now.
That's right.
Thank you, Emma of those Tyrells. A man of those Tyrells? Sorry, you need capital letters. I'm just now realizing the purpose of capital letters. Or perhaps spaces.
They didn't donate for us to critique the punctuation, Glidus.
You know what you're doing. Bran is a squire to Jaime. Duncan Egg V2. That is adorable. That is an adorable idea. The funniest way it could go, in the start they hate it, but Bran starts to hero worship Jaime, he's 9, to everyone's horror, including Jaime's. Jaime then realizes how much Ned hates it and decides it's funny, actually.
I like that. I mean, I could
concept.
see Bran like initially idolizing Jaime in the same way that Jon Snow initially idolizes.
Yeah, that's
Jaime.
what a king should look like.
And Bran wanted to be a knight, and Jaime is a great knight. So like, it makes sense to have that initial connection, and it makes sense that Jaime would reject Bran following him around in the same way that Brienne rejects Podrick at first, but then they become pals. And yeah, if it's that could be really funny.
Also, in the same way that Jon doesn't like Tyrion, and then they come to like each other, Stark and Lannister.
Yeah, no, there's comedy potential in there.
Yeah.
Thank you, TC, who says, "Hey there, Glimbus Maximus and Swiftius the Great. I've been recently watching your streaming backlog, and it got me through a pretty tough time. So thanks to you both for that.
That's so cool to hear.
Hope you're doing good, TC." Spee Ryu says, "Hey, Schwimblimbo. I recently purchased the Omniwalder t-shirt.
Oh, nice.
But instead of my friends being as amazed as I am, they all seem rather confused and weird out. What am I doing wrong?"
Okay, so your mistake started, I assume, a long time ago. What you need to do is get better friends.
Whatever series of mistakes led you to listen to Glidus and Alt-Shift-X was your first mistake. I think that the only answer is that you have to buy matching Omniwalder t-shirts for all of your friends.
Then they'll get it.
They were just jealous. They just didn't. They just wanted what you had. So I think everyone better go into the video description of this live stream and buy some Glidus and Alt-Shift-X t-shirts and art prints in the description for your friends and enemies. They make it too easy for us to shamelessly plug.
Again, we should be paying them.
Thank you, Minty, who says, "Any plans to try Dune Awakening? I'd love to see Swifty Halleck and Duncan Gliderho build a cozy home in the desert while hiding from sandworms. Love the streams." Yeah, so there is a new Dune video game that came out recently, and I would like to try it. Would you like to try it?
What sort of game is it?
I think it's an MMO survival type thing.
None of those words are in the Bible.
Yeah. I also made that noise when I heard that it was an MMO. If it was like a single player thing,
Me learning that Playside are working on a Game of Thrones RTS when in my last video on Game of Thrones video games, I was like, RTS is not the real, not the way to do this one.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think that
It could be good. It could be good.
Everyone's going to go and watch the Glidus video about Game of Thrones video games if you haven't already.
It's called Video Games of Thrones. I'm so clever.
That's never been done before. Yeah, well, I think that the maximum amount of time that I'm willing to spend on the Dune video game is going to be a couple of hours of streaming, which might be enough to get through the tutorial. But yeah, I am curious to check it out for sure. Anonymous says, "Hey, Schwan and Glubs. Gligar, has Jason made you create the Light of the Seven analysis yet?"
When season 6 episode 10 drops, it'll be with that also.
Anonymous says, "Love yous both. Can't wait for the Dunk and Egg streams next year or 2 years or 13 years. Either way, your fan base holds strong." Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Dunk and Egg as well.
Yeah, me too. I hope it'll be a simple, fun thing to discuss.
That's
while it's airing.
The new Game of Thrones prequel show that's set to come out next year.
House of the Dragon season 3 also set to come out next year. We're going to be busy bees.
There will be a lot of dragon shenanigans to discuss next year. So like and subscribe. I'm in full plug mode today.
Wow. Are you ever off?
Always on. Thank you, John12494, who says, "Do you believe that George owes an ending to his readers, or would you be content/accepting with the idea that A Song of Ice and Fire never has a true ending?"
With the hard hitters today.
I think George wants to give us an ending, and if he can give us an ending, he'll give us an ending.
Of course. But that's not the question.
Owes.
It's
It's not really a question that interests me. Like, I mean, people paid money.
Oh, that's very political of you. Well done. Well done.
Well, I was going to say something like slightly more controversial, which is that, like, people paid money for a book expecting that have an end to the story that they're reading.
When you buy a book, you buy the book. I don't think you're purchasing the rest of the series implicitly.
I don't think you can take an author to a court of law for not saying what happens to Harry Potter in the end or whatever, Do you
think George will tell us what happened to Harry Potter?
Well, he told us that Hermione Granger is going to have her teeth knocked out by Jamie Lannister. I think that George is trying to give us an ending, and I hope that he succeeds. Thank you, Zazzy Bazazzy, who says, "Hi."
Oh, hi.
Thank you, Pierce McKeon42, who says, "Hello, Glamorous and Sniff. If you ever get back on speaking terms with Alt-Shift-X, tell him that I really loved his Disaster, Apocalypse, and Religion video, and tell him that it is one of my favorite and best videos on YouTube." Yeah, look, I think that Alt-Shift-X is a uptight, pocket protector, spreadsheet-loving dweeb. But I have to admit, he smells pretty good, actually. He smells great.
I have to give him another sniff.
That's right. But I have to admit that I actually do like the Alt-Shift-X video about disaster and religion. It's kind of interesting. It's a bit different. Alt-Shift-X doesn't do a lot of non-fiction videos.
No, it was quite the foray into a new field, and I also felt that it was a very good one.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing, though. The video editing style's atrocious. All that zooming around. The zoomy-woomies.
I don't know what changes have gone on in the back end of Alt-Shift-X video production in the last couple years, but man, market improvements.
Yeah, someone's definitely been instrumental in improving the video editing style of Alt-Shift-X. I can't imagine who. I think that video is cool too. And I hope that Alt-Shift-X makes more interesting non-fiction experimental videos.
The funny thing is I really did love the swooshies. Yeah. I was a big fan of the mind map. It did give me whiplash. It did give me eye strain, but it felt cool.
I feel like most people probably don't even like that was years ago at this point. But I agree. Clearly Alt-Shift-X loved that editing style as well, with all the zooming around the mind map. But I think that for the sake of everyone's nausea, it's probably better that evolved into something a bit more sane.
Something a bit more corporate slideshow presentation.
Look, it's like horseshoe theory. Like, you start at just making PowerPoint presentations, and then you become all advanced and complicated, and eventually you arrive back at the perfection where you started, which is simple slides.
The best YouTube channels? Lemino, Sam O'Nella. It's all just presentations.
Yeah, just with a little bit of easy-eased motion.
Yeah, once they figure out how to easy-ease the After Effects keyframes, it's fucking over.
Yeah, that's right.
No one tell H-Bomber guy.
Yeah, you can really see the YouTubers who are still like addicted to this delusion that like every shot and frame needs to be a unique piece of editing art with a philosophy and creative spirit to it, which is like that's great
Good
if you
for
want
you.
to only release a video once every year.
And let's not mince words. Lemino does release the best video of the year whenever he does that.
But I'll tell you what makes it the best videos. It's not the effects in the
No,
video editing.
It's the research.
It's the research.
It's the
It's
effort,
the
it's the
writing. It's the delivery. It's not the.
But all the
effects.
window dressing is fantastic.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Fiatra Collins, who says, been listening to the A Dance with Dragons audiobook. It's really reminded me how great The Winds of Winter is going to be if it ever comes out.
Right?
Isn't that... I agree, but like, isn't that such a funny sentence? It reminded me of how great Winds is going to be if it ever comes out. The time tense...
That's a Douglas Adams sentence.
There are time travel stories with less confusing grammar and tense than that sentence. I also sometimes remember my feelings about a book that does not yet exist. Is that not a magic trick that George has performed on us all for us to be nostalgic
You want to talk
for
about
years
you wanna
about
talk
something
about-
that hasn't happened yet? That's
You-
a magic spell.
You want to talk about unity, hive mind, collectiveness, consciousness? That's what he's created. That's where we are.
We collectively created it. It hits you with that Clone Orbis Tertius Akbar, doesn't he?
What?
Yeah. Yeah. Don't worry about
Yeah,
it. Don't worry.
you got it.
Don't worry about it. All right. Zane says, Sand King? Bad Dad? Frank? Is that you, Frank? Yeah, well, so this story, Sand Kings by George Martin. It's got sand in it. It's got daddy issues in it. That is reminiscent of Dune by Frank Herbert, which also involves sand. And also Frank was a bit of a not great father if you watch the old Shift X video about Frank Herbert. So,
Never seen it.
I too see the connections.
Genitalia says, "What's up?
So,
What's up?"
Millie Green says, just had knee surgery, needed a new live to keep me entertained. Love you guys. Thanks for helping me fall asleep for many years.
You got it. This sleeps on me.
Hope your knee's doing all right.
I broke my foot a month and a half ago, and it sucked.
How is your foot?
Oh, it's fine now.
Nice. Thank you, TJ Liney, who says, hello, Swift, Dastardly, and Glidley. Love you both. Keep doing your devilish deeds.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Lush Jester, who says, given the focus on the idea of connections in Sandkings, what character relationship / dynamic are you most looking forward to in future Song and Ice and Fire books? Howland meeting John, Sam dealing with Euron, Stoneheart dealing with Jaime.
Great question.
I think I've said before that the idea of Arya meeting Stoneheart would be so crazy because, you know, Arya's relationship with Kat was, you know, sometimes difficult. I think she doesn't feel as close to her mother as, you know, some of the other Stark kids did. And now that Arya's become a Death Cult member, how's she going to feel when she meets her mother, who is now a gosh darn zombie bent on revenge?
Who is leading a cult?
Who is leading a cult? Like, yeah, what is, there's a lot of layers to that one.
I think Arya looks at that and thinks, oh, what, I've become this. Oh no.
I think like Bran reuniting with his siblings. Like, I mean, in the TV show, that was such a wet fart because they decided to like take away Bran's personality.
Best season ever!
Yeah, man.
But I'll tell you a spoiler. I don't think that George Martin is going to remove Bran's human personality in the books. I think some wild stuff's going to happen, but I don't think he's going to turn into a robot like he did in the show.
I think that could be like the ending, the very, very, very ending of like it being revealed that Bran has sacrificed his humanity for the sake of this unity hive mind consciousness that fixes all the problems. But, you know, that's not very George for the unity hive mind consciousness to fix all the problems. It's also not George for all the problems to be fixed at the end of a story.
I think Daenerys meeting Jon is going to be interesting. Hi, Auntie. How's that going to go?
Let's have sex.
Yeah.
Cersei and Jaime. I would like to see them interact once more.
Yeah, that's true. After Jaime like rejects Cersei, and Cersei getting increasingly unhinged and Jaime getting increasingly hinged.
Yeah.
Thank you, Artem, who says, this time through Streamlabs, fine. Thank you, Artem. You don't like shingles? Hi to Glimpses of Hope and Schwindler's, actually maybe not that one.
Good job.
We'll put that on the back burner.
You'll figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison for Dice, who says, I have watched the fake Jon Snow.
Congratulations.
It's amazing. When will we get the fake Tyrion and the fake Cersei?
Oh my god.
You're not going to let your fans down by not finishing the series, are you?
Of course we are. Of course we're going to let you down by not finishing the series.
No, we respond famously well to emotional manipulation.
We respond well to Streamlabs donations.
Are we going to do the fake Tyrion and the fake Cersei?
I don't know
Maybe.
about them, but I am motivated to someday, potentially, doing something.
Yeah. No, I reckon
Tyrion and
probably.
Cersei are big characters who are there for the whole show. They're in shitloads of screen time. Stannis Baratheon sounds a lot better.
Yeah.
A lot easier for us to chew on sooner rather than later.
Yeah, a more minor character does sound a bit more achievable.
The real Pip.
Thank you, Lush Jester, who says, I like the idea of Jaime having a failed redemption story. Jaime wants to be better, tries to be better, but ultimately loses to his own desires and ends up in a similar position as he did in the TV show. I feel like that's a very strong story. I agree. I think that, like, a lot of things in the TV show, the execution was poor, but the idea was basically good, and the idea is probably taken from what George's plan is.
Broad strokes, it's the same painting, just with no detail.
Like, I think D&D talked about Jaime as, like, being addicted, like a drug addict, addicted to Cersei, and, like, yeah, sure. Like, there are destructive relationships like that. Sometimes we are in love with the wrong person, and sometimes it does destroy us, and I think that sometimes people do try to be better and they fail. So, like, yeah, I totally agree that, like, that something like that could work. I just don't think that it was executed well enough in the show, and I hope that it'll be executed better in the books.
There's no way it couldn't be. There's, like, I don't know how George could write something that poor.
Well, I think the way that it fails is that he writes it too long. And he keeps complicating it.
I suppose that incompletion is a failure of sorts.
Yeah. Thank you, Person Man, who says, Greetings, Glug and Shat.
Wow.
Finally watched the fake Jon Snow and it made me genuinely depressed. Great work. Do the fake Quaithe next.
See, Quaithe, that's a very easy one to do.
That's a very contained
She's in like 2 scenes.
one, yeah.
And we can just talk about how dumb it is that she just disappears afterwards. Glug and Shat, aren't those Binding of Isaac bosses?
They sound like it, don't they? We can do another Isaac stream at some point as well. We've done a few Binding of Isaac streams on the Alt Swift X Gaming, everyone's favorite gaming channel. The most what's the word for making a lot of stuff?
Prolific.
The most prolific gaming channel this side of Jacksepticeye. That's a gaming channel.
Yeah, it was.
I did it.
I actually don't know what he does these days. Our Telltale, the one stream we did of the Telltale Game of Thrones game has like over 200,000 views.
Does it? We should do more of that.
But I hated it.
Don't worry, I'll make him do it. Thank you, Lush Jester, who says, how and why is Jaime still so strong at the start of Game of Thrones? Hasn't he been a glorified door guard for a decade since the rebellion? Every other character from the time frame is past their prime. Is he just sparring with Barristan? The rest of the Kingsguard suck.
Leg press.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real question. Does Jaime lift? You'd have to imagine that he is sparring a lot. I mean, we see him sparring with Ill and Payne.
Yeah, and Bronn in the show.
I imagine that Kingsguard would spar and would practice. I mean, yeah, I guess it's tough if you don't have, like, skilled opponents to spar with. But, yeah, I mean, Barry's an option.
I do love in the Game of Thrones show, in the first episode, when there's that extra scene between Ned and Jaime, and Jaime's like, oh, why don't you fight an attorney, huh? I want to see you fight an attorney, because like they sort of have a crush on each other. And Ned's like, I don't want anyone to know what I can do in battle for when it happens, for real.
That's exactly how Sean Bean says it.
And it's like, this man is in his mid-50s. I don't think he's really in top fighting for. Although Barristan's legendary though. I don't know.
Jamie's funny because he's another one of those characters where George is like, he's the best fighter ever, and everyone
Yeah.
knows how skilled he is. But you never see Jamie fight against any skilled opponents.
And he has like barely any accolades.
He doesn't even fight Ned in the books. He just says that he's the best. Arthur Dane is like similar.
Yeah, what's he actually done? Barristan's done stuff.
Thank
Gregor
you.
and Oberon have done stuff, even though he
Possibly
wasn't
too
on
much
the Alt
stuff.
Shift X top 10 fighters in Westeros list.
Shame on Alt Shift X. Yeah, we don't have shame on our
We need
soundboard.
Ding Ding. Yeah, we need Unella's bell.
Please provide your own ding.
BYO Ding.
Thank you for the donation from Tiny Circle Committee, who says, I tried to get my mum to watch House of the Dragon. She does not like the incest.
Avoid incest at all costs.
I wanted to watch I, Claudius, because George Martin says that I, Claudius, the TV story about Roman history, is one of his big inspirations for A Song of Ice and Fire. But I realized that watching I, Claudius with family is not ideal because there is a lot of incest in I, Claudius.
I see.
Maybe that's part of why there's so much incest in Game of Thrones. It's I, Claudius stuff.
Well, it's a lot of ruling class bloodlines that try to not mix with the common blood.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
The Greek Egyptian dynasty. Who are they? The
Pharaonic, the Egyptian.
actually, it was a lot of dynasties. Yeah,
incestuous-
yeah.
yeah. A lot of that.
Not just How is his name escaping me? The Alexander's general.
Ptolemaic
That's the one.
fellas.
Yeah.
Ptolemy. Thank you, Scato101, who says thanks for all you do. And thank you, Wealth Wolf, who says your own private Duncan Gliderho. Good night, fellas.
Good night, Wealth Wolf.
I think this concludes our live stream.
It sure does.
This was a delight. Thank you, Glidus. I'm delighted.
You're delighted.
I am delighted.
I'm good.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
I'd say I'm pleased.
Pleased?
Maybe not delighted, but I'm pleased.
I'd say I'm tickled. I'm
Well,
tickled.
thanks for sharing.
This was fun. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can listen to our live streams in podcast format if you'd like. They're on Spotify. They're on podcast apps. You can listen to podcasts for free with no ads on free podcast apps. Did you know that?
That's crazy.
Everyone thinks that you have to sign up to an ad-supported subscription. So you don't. It's free. That's what's cool about podcasts. It's free. Consider that. I'm just putting it out there. Consider not giving anyone money and just take it for free.
But that could have been my money.
Well, good point. So also consider giving us money by
it's
supporting on Patreon or by watching on Nebula or by buying merch, links of which are all in the description.
Yeah,
But
you
of
are
course,
right.
we're just happy to be here. We're just
Podcasts are
happy.
free. We're happy.
We're happy to chat. We're glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here. You know? We're just
Live
vibing.
in the moment. Stop trying to optimize yourself for productivity in the future, and sometimes just take it all in.
Yeah, man.
You know?
Sniff the roses. You know?
Watch the sunset.
Yeah. Eat broccoli.
Broccoli's great.
Broccoli's...
So delicious.
Do you want to do a vegetable tier list?
Any day of the week,
Roast
except
zucchini.
Thursday.
Roast zucchini is my S tier. And sweet potato.
Sweet potato. I will defend until my last.
Are you an eggplant guy?
I think my personal jury is actually still out on eggplant.
Yeah. I think I have warmed to eggplant a bit, but it's on a real sort of knife edge of liking it or
You're on
hating it, depending on how you
Thin ice
prepare it.
eggplant.
Maybe it depends on how ripe it is and how maybe I've had the wrong the eggplant wasn't ready or just I wasn't ready for it.
That's equally likely.
Yeah. Damn. All right. Well, with those spicy hot takes, once we've told the people what they really wanted to know, I think we'll see you all next time. Tell us in the comments what we should discuss in our next live stream.
Tell us in the comments what your favorite vegetable is.
Hell yeah. Cheers. Thank you.
Love pumpkin.